Good morning, Denver. I know you're almost as excited about today as I am. We are getting ready for the budget hearings to begin. Now, I know this is boring. I do. I was just as disengaged as everyone else, basically for the past 7 years. I had been very involved for a very long time in other countries, in other places. I came to Denver to create and raise my family. And I got a big old wake-up call. Granted, I wouldn't have been much use to anybody because I didn't know how to use Twitter back then, and I was always tired because I had little kids. But I tell you that to tell you this. If you are only just now becoming familiar with the process, with the system, with how it works, do not be ashamed. Do not hesitate to ask me questions. Do not hesitate to say, hey, this makes no sense. That is intentional. Our entire society has been conditioned from day one when you started school to not ask questions, to figure it out yourself, or to keep your mouth shut. You are basically shamed into submission, and the insecure overachievers are the ones who do the most work behind the scenes, ask the fewest questions, and promoted the fastest, because they will then become the pawns of Wall Street eventually, while Wall Street continues to take over our cities, as it has been doing now for decades. So I could wax poetic about that, or I could help you decode what's actually happening and give you the tools you need to go enact the changes that all of us want to see. Now, I also have 4 kids under 8, no twins. I've got a meeting that I cannot get out of and really, frankly, don't want to get out of. That's at 10 this morning because I missed the last 5 due to protests, so I got to show up to this one. So I will be present and talking for as long as I can this morning. Then I'm going to go have my other meeting, and I'm going to leave this running. And then I will, so because I know a lot of people don't have access to Zoom. And I've also noticed that a lot of these fuckers do not, like last night, 299 people were shut out of the RTD meeting. That means 400 people showed up to the RTD budget meeting. And I'm like, wow, whoa, that is what we need to see. They are so complacent. They've been so used to us not showing up. They don't have the right equipment to accommodate us when we do. That is the kind of disobedience that I want to see. Disobedience means showing up and taking part in the process while we figure out which windows other people can decide to break on their own time. Not that I'm encouraging you, but I can also gladly tell you, if I was going to show up and protest, this is where I'd do it. This is the person who has a little bit of influence. There's nothing you can do to scare the DPD. Like, they kill people with impunity. There is nothing you can do to scare Mayor Hancock. But what you can do is find all their appointees and be like, hey, complicit, might want to stop you. That is where I would recommend starting, because if their inner circle refuses to do their bidding, then they got a problem. So this system only works as long as we allow it to protest the right places, push the right levers, and keep showing up. It's designed for you to tap out so they can be like, well, they don't care. They were watching basketball instead of coming to this budget meeting that impacts their lives. It's elitism, it's gross, and it's how they dismiss you. So with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get set up on the Zoom. I'm going to get this going. Any questions you have, any at all, do not hesitate to ask me. Right now, what's about to happen, because yesterday, to give you a brief recap, tell your friends to join this right now if they can. Be streaming and listening to this while you're at work if you can, at least listening out a part of your ear. If anything that we say, that I say, that you hear catches your attention, this is what you do. Retweet the broadcast. We are live on Twitter right now, or on Facebook. Share the post with the piece of commentary that caught your attention. Here's an example. We are asking, the DPD is generously offered to take small reductions that no one else is taking in year 1, with a raise in year 2, which no one else is getting. No one. The RTD has already accepted this and adjusted their budget accordingly. So the DPD basically is setting the budget for the city, not the mayor, not you. It is your duty to fight for your freedom. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. And it is our duty right now to tell those fuckers to put our money where our mouth is, not where the DPD wants it to be. So what's going to happen today is that the chair of the Denver City Council, Gilmore, who is awful, by the way, like really terrible and hard to listen to, you're going to hate her. And so I want you to, and that's okay. I want you to hate watch this. I want you to be so angry that you then say, now what do we do? And then go do it, because we've got to keep showing up. Right now, they're being like, they can look down on us and say, well, they don't even show up to city council meetings. Well, yeah, as soon as we did, and then y'all went to Zoom. So I went to this. Fight the power. This is how. Gilmore is going to be presenting the budget to the city council while they start their deliberations. The overview is going to last for 90 minutes. At 10:30, then it shifts into committee style debates, where Herndon will be the first to go because he leads the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and which is why last night's meeting kind of ties into all this. So there's a lot to keep up with, a lot of moving pieces. I'm going to continue to put those pieces together for you while this week unfolds. These next 3 days are critical. If you are serious at all about defunding the police, this is how we defund the police. With me? Okay, so breaking windows is part of it. It's important. I'm never going to tell a person not to, but it is useless if we're not doing this too. There's a lane for everyone. I can't be out at night. I got little kids. But what I can do is coach and teach and educate and make this revolution move, right? Right, let's do it. Hello, comments. Good morning, Jesse. I'm so glad to see you here. Thank you for engaging, even though I know you're far away. Now, with no further ado, that's how this happens, by the way. If you have something to say it in the comment, and I'll put it up on the screen. I'm streaming live now on YouTube and Twitter and Twitch, a private Facebook group, a public Facebook group, my wall, and the Wall of Moms Facebook page. I want to make this accessible to everyone because those guys limit who can be on Zoom. Some of it's going to be on TV, but it's really hard to follow. So with no further ado, I'm going to get in the Zoom and get this going. And I lost my glasses, which is just terrible because I'm so old and I can't see. So sorry for the funny faces. I'm like, I don't know where my glasses at. Budget hearings.
That this has been 6 months that we have been dealing with COVID-19, and these are unprecedented times in our city. And I know that unprecedented is probably the most overused word now in 2020. But there has been a lot of work by city agencies, by the mayor's office and others to make sure that we have a budget that addresses the needs of the city, but that we also need to hear from city council through this process. And so with that being said,
which means they need to hear from you through this process. You
introduce themselves in numerical order, please. And then we will go to Brendan Hanlon and Stephanie Adams with our budget and management office. So we'll start with Council District 1.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Madam President. Amanda Sandoval, Northwest Denver, District 1.
Good morning, Kevin.
Most notably known for using the phrase black on black and brown on brown crime.
Torres, West Denver, District 3.
Good morning, Kendra Black, District 4, Southeast Denver.
Good morning, Amanda Sawyer, District 5.
Good morning, Madam
Most
President.
known for
Paul Cashman, South Denver,
smugness.
District 6.
He's known for calling
Good morning, Madam President.
City Council a clown show and using process to beat up Candace Sedabaka.
District 8, Northeast Denver.
Good morning, District 9, Candy Sedabaka.
Our Lord and Savior Candy, love
Good
you,
morning,
lady.
Denver. This is Chris Hines with Denver's Perfect 10.
Chris is known for not doing the reading. Perfect.
Oh. right.
And that's
I'm
Jolyn Clark,
looking
that
here
smug
for,
motherfucker. That is my
our
councilman.
at-large members,
Fuck you,
I
Jolyn
think
Clark.
that they're probably in the process of
Anybody
joining
wants to run in
us,
District 7,
and,
I'd love to help you.
we'll go ahead and pause here for a second. I know Councilwoman Kniech just joined us. We're doing introduction.
Good morning, Robin Kniech at large.
Thank you, Councilwoman Kniech. And, you know, thank you, council members, for being here this morning. And we worked really closely with the Budget and Management Office and Sky Stewart and the Mayor's administration to make sure that we were able to craft these budget hearings in such a way that you felt like you had enough time, council members, to ask questions and to delve into the information. And so I want to publicly acknowledge again Brendan Hanlon, Stephanie Adams, and Laura Perry for all of your work, and to also acknowledge Sky Stewart as well, and the city employees that make our city run. I have been able to witness
who will be taking
firsthand
large
the
pay cuts
difficulties that city employees are having to deal with right now through retirements, through massive reductions in their budgets. And it's not unlike the rest of the country. We're all going through a grief process. We're all going through a renormalization process. And so as we're going through these budget hearings, I just want to remind folks that, you know, everybody is going through a lot. And
oh, no. We are not all in this together. Don't. That is not true. That is not true. DPD is not in this with us. Do not let that pass.
I would expect that City Council is most likely going to follow our same cadence that we did in 2020 and standing in solidarity in different ways with city employees through this process. And so just wanted to kick off with that, and knowing that we're going to have lots of questions and we have a large slide deck, I will go ahead and we'll acknowledge Mayor Hancock when he joins us, but we'll go ahead and kick it over to the Budget and Management Office and team for the presentation this morning.
Hi, Councilman. I'm going to actually start out.
All right, thank you. And we might need you to mute one of your audios. There's a bit of an echo.
Yes. Okay. All right. To those of you who are watching and don't know who I am, my name is Stephanie Kirianis Adams, and I have the privilege of serving as the City and County of Denver's Budget and Management Director. I think that Zach is going to help us out by, thank you, Zach. Before I dive into the presentation, I'm going to probably echo a little bit of what Council President Gilmore talked about, but this has been a pretty significantly challenging budget, and it was done by many people have contributed to it. I think I just wanted to state publicly that you should all be very proud of your city leaders. They simultaneously dealt with a pandemic, try to think about different and innovative and safe ways to deliver their core services. They worked really hard to address their city employees' concerns. And simultaneously with all of that going on, they reduced their budget. They looked for savings, not once, not twice, at least
everywhere but the DPD.
To go through their budgets to figure out.
Yeah, they decided to cut the grass less frequently, but not homeless sweeps less frequently. That is not fiscal management, y'all. It isn't.
Planning and programming actually really dove in and helped us with the budget book. Our Peak Academy team went out and worked with agencies to help them think through the challenges that they're facing as their resources have been reduced and trying to face some of the workload. The OSEI team, who you'll hear from today, our equity team, sat with us and really made sure that we were keeping historically marginalized communities of colors, First Nation, Indigenous peoples, and under-resourced communities at the front of our conversation, and they'll tell you some more about that here today. And of course, my deepest appreciation for the budget and management analysts. They worked tirelessly, many hours a week. I don't know, they missed lots of weekends with their families, many late night dinners. Thank you to those families too, because
thank you to all the families who can't afford dinners and to sacrifice the most so that the rich could get richer during this time of crisis. Thank you very much.
So today we're going to cover, I've been asked to do a little bit of a budget 101, just for those of you who might be watching online and haven't navigated through the budget before.
And don't understand what it is we're about to do to the city.
Of how the budget is organized. going to hand it back off to Brendan Hanlon, who's going to walk through the economic forecast, and then that will flow right into the revenue overview and our projections. I'll toss it back to me, and then we'll talk a little bit with our OSEI team about the process and really the meat of what's in the budget book. Brendan will also come back and talk about some federal funding, and then Laura Perry will come and talk to you about our capital improvement program. The next slide. So how do I navigate Denver's budget? I think it's been a lot of time on this, so I really tried to keep it pretty brief. Through the next slide, Zach. We're going to really just touch on a refresher on the budget calendar. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview, kind of a quick tutorial on some of the budget book sections. The line item budget, I just wanted to take a minute to talk about that. That is actually online. We were trying to make it ADA compliant, and by doing that, had deleted some information. It's our first time putting the whole thing online. So I did send you another document last night that I'm hoping will pass the muster for ADA compliance, and we'll post that as well. And then just a really brief touch base on some of the guidance that we provided to agencies that you'll see over the next couple weeks. Next slide, Zach. So you can see that we actually started this budget really at the beginning of the year, right? It's a pretty long process. In lots of ways, what happens is our colleagues in the controller's office, once they have handed off, finished up the comprehensive annual financial report, it's kind of a handoff to us because that helps us understand how the previous year ended, and then we go into the next quarter, April through June, and we work pretty in earnest with our agencies. And really the majority of work that's happening in that first part happens with our agencies who are working with their departments to develop their budget proposals. We provide them with guidance, we provide them with the forms, and we work with them to make sure that the information gets into the system. July through September is where we're really digging into those change requests. We're trying to understand what the impacts might be overall to other agencies. We try to figure out if there are opportunities to scale and to do some work with that. And we present that to the mayor, and then he makes his final recommendations.
Glad you're here, Jesse. Thank you.
And as you all know, we then submit our proposed budget to you all here yesterday. And then we will have this ongoing public conversation about the budget through October. There's actually a public hearing at the end of October, as you're all well aware.
We got to show up to that, you guys.
We are required to have a balanced budget in place by the end of November.
We got to do all of this. I don't like it either, y'all. I don't.
Stephanie, I'm going to pause for
so very high level. So we have we've always had two volumes in the budget book.
Stephanie, can you hear me okay?
And the very first part of volume one is really
you keep going,
sort of what
Steph.
we're talking about today.
I love it.
About the overall revenue and general fund revenue. It has a lot of our schedules in it. It really kind of gives you a perspective on the budget in whole. It also, by the way, has some detailed information in it around grants and special revenue funds. So when you're asking about a grant or a special revenue fund, you could turn to that section. And it will explain to you who the grantor is, what the dollars are, as well as the special revenue funds. Oh, is there a question?
Yes, I was just texting you. I wanted to pause.
Councilman,
Oh, I shouldn't be moving.
Hold on, I had to turn mine down, guys.
Oh, there we go. That might be.
Sorry.
Are you good? Can you hear me now?
Oh, do we have a question? Sorry.
Yes, I wanted to just have you pause for a quick second so that I could acknowledge the mayor. He's joined us.
Fuck you, Mayor Hancock. Mayor Hancock's in there. Fuck you, Mayor Hancock.
Say a few words. Thank you for joining us.
No, absolutely, Madam President. Very gracious of you. You didn't need to do that. I appreciate you doing it. We just hit a little traffic through because of an accident this morning. But I'm here. We can continue on with Stephanie. I think what she has to say is much more important than anything I can say. But thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. Just wanted to acknowledge your presence for everybody on the call and the public. All right. Go ahead, Stephanie.
I hate that guy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, so
yeah, let's acknowledge the mayor with his bootlicking budget.
The budget book has 2 volumes. So the very first portion of the book is really the high level.
I have 2 volumes too. Sleeping and city council.
Overall, side by side, what those agencies are receiving. Volume 2 is something that we'll dig into here in the next few slides, and it's really that's the bulk of the book that will be of interest, I think, over the next couple of weeks because it really focuses in on agencies. There are 2 new volumes this year. The capital improvement program has actually been pulled out, so it's easier to find and quicker to get to. And Laura Perry can talk a little bit about that. But that is our 3rd volume. I don't know if I would call this volume 4, but that is really the line item budget. I do want to say just a quick couple words about the line item budget. Also, that what you'll see, it really does relate a lot to
you guys,
things you're going to see in the budget book.
Again, I promise you it's going to be boring, and I know it's going to be tedious. I do. But the line item budget is where they hide the shit they don't want you to see. That is why we have to stay here and stay tuned.
They have that ability and that flexibility.
That is why this is not, there's not a copy in my hands right now to go through. That's how you know. They would print it and share us or give us the option to purchase a printed or print it out ourselves to go through it if they really wanted us to understand it.
The first part of the agency detail, or volume 2, is actually pretty straightforward. But for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it really talks about just the org chart for each agency.
Fuck you, Mayor Hancock.
It does provide a
Fuck
summary
you,
of
Mayor Hancock. That's how I feel. Thanks for asking, Jess. I appreciate it. How are you doing this morning?
And then,
I'm so glad you showed up, by the way. I love you, Jess.
Talk about how they
everybody, this woman is a saint, and I adore her. And if you don't follow Jess Wiederholt, you need to. She is amazing and does incredibly good work. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you got a really bad mayor, Jesse. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I would say come out here, but I can't say it'd be better.
There's a new section
I want to lie to you.
Part of the budget book this year is really the COVID-19 impact section. So what I mentioned earlier about
this is what matters, and this is why the line items matter. What they're saying is it's a pandemic, and so instead of responding with assistance, we're responding with police force to prevent crime, because poor people might be mad and not have enough while others have plenty. Which is why I will continue to say this is what the budget basically says.
For the remainder of this year and possibly even into next year. Next slide, Zach. The budget team and I pay a lot of attention to this particular section, and it's really about the kinds of changes that you'll see year over year. We did add a new section at the very top to talk about the financial impacts of this year's budget. In June, the CFO came to you at a city council meeting to talk a little bit about some of the work that we had done around mid-year budget savings. Remember, we didn't go in and rescind people's budgets. What we did is we took those dollars and we sequestered them within their existing appropriation. So what will happen here is we'll talk about what was sequestered, the amount that was sequestered, because it does show up in all the in the tables. And what happens is, for a couple of reasons, we did not automatically take those reductions out of the 2021 budget. First of all, timing. As you know, as we've been building the 2021 budget, we've been working to balance the 2020 budget. So some of those reductions, we just didn't have in time to automatically roll them into the 2021 budget. And depending on their work in 2020 and their vision for 2021, those reductions could be very different. If you think about rec centers is a great example. We knew we couldn't open those rec centers in 2020. We are hopeful and plan to open those in 2021. So taking the kinds of savings that we have realized in 2020 for 2021, when we think we're gonna have our rec centers open, doesn't make a lot of sense. So you'll see a little bit of that in everyone's agency detail. There are, sorry, just a couple more points here. I did pull out an example for exercise and license, a couple.
Everything that's happening right now is butt covering when
that you'll see
the accountants come back in and start to take this apart. There are legal, so you've got the budget that normal people use, and the bookkeeping that normal people use, and then you've got the bookkeeping for reporting to the government for tax purposes, and then a third set of books to the government oversight board regulatory bodies. So there's a chance that is all they're doing right now, is going through. You might see one number here that looks different from a number here over here, but it's the same number presented a different way. That's true. That's just how accounting works.
Part of the savings that people put forward.
But that's also how we make you think savings aren't there when they actually are, and that money is somewhere when it actually isn't.
So we're going to talk a little bit about that today too. There are some significant positions that were held vacant positions. And so you will see this as a reoccurring bullet in the budget book as well, that people who are holding positions. We've identified a reduction for that salary that was budgeted, and also a reduction in the FTE, the full-time equivalent. So you'll see that reoccurring in the budget book. Okay, so I'm ready, Zach, for the next slide. Okay, so there are different tables in the budget book, and they really work in concert with that programmatic changes that I showed you. There are two different kinds of tables. There's a department table and there's a budget detail table. And depending on the size of the agency, they may just have they'll all have budget detail tables. Some of them do have department tables. So the examples I gave you here is that general services, which is a larger department, has a department table, and then they also have a budget detail table that kind of drills down a little bit lower into their program areas. Whereas excise and license is a smaller organization, and we just have their budget detail table. I've circled a couple things that you will notice in the 2021 budget that you would not have seen in the 2020 budget. One of them is what I've been talking about for a little while, the sequestered dollars, restricted budget is what it's called. So that is in 2020. Remember that you won't see that in 2021. The reason it's in 2020 is because we did mid-year reductions. We didn't reduce budgets, we moved that appropriation into that account. So you will see it go from a dollar amount to 0 in 2021. You'll also see that we have identified furlough and vacancy savings.
If anyone is in here and happens to be an accountant or be a finance person, please speak up, make comments. When you make comments in any app that you might be watching, I can put them on the screen like this, and they can become talking points.
Oh. That's a
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, before I turn it over to Brendan Hanlon to do the economic overview, I really want to make sure that I say that you should all be very comforted to have a leader like Brendan.
Comforted? Do y'all feel comforted? DPD killed somebody last night, and y'all are coach-owing to the DPD. The entire basis of all budget discussions have started with accepting the DPD CBA as is.
And I'm very proud of it. Everyone should feel good to make sure that he's at the head of this. So thank you. Sorry for doing that.
Well, and Brendan, I'm really happy that you got the stadium effect with that too, with all the echo and everything. So it was like you were in the stadium and we're thanking you. And I know that this has taken, a massive amount of your time and your diligence and integrity around the budget, and the city it is top notch beyond. And so go ahead and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Council President. I really appreciate all the kind words. Stephanie that was very kind. So thank you all. I couldn't do it without a fantastic team. Laura Perry, Stephanie Adams, Margaret Danuser, Julie Smith, who's been helping with comms, the mayor's office team, all of the agencies. There's been a tremendous amount of work, and it is not. It's an overstatement to associate too much of it with me. A lot of employees have been working weekends, developing these concepts.
You know who else works weekends?
Making sure that they're being sensitive.
Departments who no longer have overtime, so they force their mid-level salaried employees to work 7 days a week after they fire and get rid of all of the hourly workers, because we're making the wrong cuts.
Where we stand at this point in time. So
at least in RTD, we definitely are. I streamed that last night and screamed about it.
The foundation of it in each of the presentations we've given over the previous few months to describe just the shock that has happened internationally, nationally, to the state, and here in Denver. And based on our public health emergency, we saw a sudden and broad halt to economic activity. Our greatest impacts are to our service industries and retail, specifically restaurants and bars being temporarily closed, severe hit to tourism and hospitality related activity, and sharp decline in retail sales. And we saw an immediate shock in unemployment claims, a very significant spike.
I know.
But that is not something
I can't keep up with their murders either.
To Denver, it
crushes me.
Colorado, it's the nation as well. Next slide, please. 2020 economy. So I get a lot of questions about, well, where are we? We certainly aren't in March and April. We are looking at a kind of in between scenario. We're not in a full public health situation where we have to be completely closed in a stay-at-home order. So where does the economy stand? We are seeing some signs of economic recovery, and I think I've represented in multiple council meetings now that we would be seeing some signs of recovery through the latter part of 2020 and into 2021, but we're assuming that we're not going to see revenue performance fully recovered to 2019 levels until the end of 2021. And I think we're seeing some overshadowing of this recovery at this point in time that we're keeping an active eye on. The first is a lack of control of health.
First of all, that they're taking Trump's talking points right now. We do not have an economic recovery. We do not. The markets are recovering because of accounting tricks like the ones that you're going to see today. Accounting tricks I learned how to do at Wharton. Accounting tricks that are so commonplace, accountants miss them.
That is not fully controlled at this point. So it creates a lot of uncertainty.
Because no one reads the footnotes.
One-to-one tied to our economy.
By the way, if ever you do have
what the future holds when it comes to the health situation.
The returns for a company in your hand, the report, the quarterly or the yearly report, start with the footnotes. The footnotes is where you bury the things you don't want people to ask you questions about or pay attention to.
This 8.8% level in the latter part of this year, that seems as though that isn't weakening. That sounds like it's getting better. I think what we're concerned about is a stagnation in unemployment. That maybe this 8 to 10% unemployment number we're seeing some economists weigh in on, that might be the expectation through the end of the year.
If you want to pay attention to an economist who puts all of this in plain language, he was my professor at Wharton. I love this guy. I TA'd for him. I respect him that much. Justin Wolfers. Justin Wolfers will be the first to tell you that this is a dog and pony show. Unemployment is not improving anywhere in the country. That this recovery isn't supported by the numbers anywhere, and he puts it in plain English.
A softening path to consumer activity. No, you're good, Zach. Thank you. Another thing that we have looked at is
I'm going to be getting myself in as many places as possible and streaming as much as possible.
Federal stimulus checks.
So I'm one of the admins for Wall of Moms. The others tend to show up in person more frequently than I do because my job, the way that my role is kind of shaking out right now, is to teach, to educate, and recruit. I want to give you guys the confidence that comes from understanding the issues to bust into any session and be like, that is a lie. Stop. And I can prove it, because usually what happens is I'll say something that makes sense, but if people don't totally understand it the next time that they want to regurgitate that thought, they falter and they get nervous and they keep their mouth shut. I want to make sure you guys don't do that. I want you to have everything you need to succeed. I'm a coach through and through. We're going to get through this together.
We're also tracking, sorry, I just have to move my video.
But yeah, I'm interested in all of these. If you guys hear of a meeting that you think might be important, let me know. If you'll watch it, I will stream it and I will talk all the way through it.
Stats over time. And while it's good to see 73, 70, 72, 75% of households.
And for the record, final note, I don't make any money doing this. I'm just that angry. I have no intention of running for office because I don't want anyone talking to me the way that I talk to them, because I'm a little bit of a chicken like that. So, I mean, I don't want any of these positions. When I vote, I'm choosing who I want to protest, who I want to argue with.
So
I'm choosing my opponent.
Numbers yesterday during the press conference, and this is Denver compared to the nation. I did receive a question yesterday about, well, what does nation mean? And why is Denver lagging so far behind? Please remember that the nation is the nation in total. So this is not just a look at other urban areas. It's also small rural communities. So it's an aggregate of the nation as a whole. But I think what we're watching is
I could tear this apart if I had the numbers on the whiteboard behind me, but then you would really get bored. Basically, what you're looking at, these numbers represent, when you're looking at unemployment, you're looking at people who are still attempting to collect and are reporting that they are looking for jobs. It does not count the unhoused. It does not count the chronic unemployed. I mean, there's a whole labor. It doesn't count stay-at-home moms that had to stay at home because of COVID, because we can't work now. There are so many people who matter that are left out of these numbers because we have not changed the way they're calculated since 1967.
So our small businesses, both locally and nationally.
That's what makes them racist and ableist.
Still struggling
and
to
misogynist.
stay open or having had reopened as part
and
of,
you can dismiss me as a feminist, but if the numbers are racist, ableist, and misogynist, then they're not accurate.
Next slide.
It's not an accurate reflection of what we need to be talking about. And on an intellectual level, I categorically reject all of this.
Presentations, and I'm going to focus on the very top of this slide, on the very bottom of the slide, and right in the middle around non-store retailers. So food, services, and drinking places, and then retail and food services make up a significant set of the drivers that support.
And this is the justification that they're going to use right now for this, for example.
Tourism and hospitality, our arts venues as well, draw in.
That's from the mayor's budget, $3.5 million that they are going to continue to spend on convention center operations in hopes of bringing in more revenue than that, because they disguise the way it's calculated. Oh, but if we spend 3.5, we get $2 million back. We get $2 million back for every 1 million. That's 100% ROI. The math doesn't even make sense.
Our online
now, this is not terrible. 3.5 million on operations is jobs, but what kind of jobs?
Positive to our financial position. I will talk a little bit about an online sales proposition that'll be that we're assuming in the budget as we move forward in 2021. In a few slides. Slide. Denver unemployment. So this was
the chart that
I was referencing earlier on. I could see that the data might have dropped out when we PDF this, so I apologize. I'll get a fresh copy out that has the data along the bottom of this. But what you see is that large spike in unemployment, both in terms of percentage and quantity of people who are have weekly continued unemployment claims, and then that orange line is trending down. But I was reminded by our economist in the Department of Finances.
Another problem here, just a little niggle in data. When we talk about numbers, you spend your first year of graduate school. It doesn't matter what program you're in. It doesn't matter. You're going to do research, and that means you got to do statistics, and you got to be good with data. Because if you don't understand statistics and you don't understand numbers, you're not doing the world any good. So when it comes to weekly unemployment claims, the weak point there is the number of people attempting to file for the first time who are unable to do so because they are unable to get anyone on the phone. The backlog, last I heard, and I heard this a few days ago, was 7 weeks. So there's a huge lag in those numbers. Attempted to reports don't count. Roll-offs who are still unemployed don't count. It's like you just don't matter anymore. So the housewife, so the marketing executive who got laid off in the first round of cuts after COVID hit, who had been looking for a job, collecting unemployment, but now has to homeschool 2 teenagers, distance learning because their school has a COVID outbreak in Highlands Ranch and is going to be shutting. That person is probably not looking for a job right now. And that person doesn't count. It is not reflected in the numbers. That's how you know the numbers are higher. They have not adjusted these to account for the global pandemic.
So that is why you saw that blue line dip, but you see that
it means it's a lie. This is why black women matter so much when we talk about black women. Black women doing like Dr. April Alexander, who is amazing and gorgeous, and I love every word she says. She would be tearing this apart right now because she gets it. She is able to tell you, I'm not reflected here, and here's why. Women can say, I'm not reflected here, here's why. Which is why when we're talking to men who are like, this gets everybody, and it's like, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
On the right-hand side,
we're not listening to the people who are saying, you've left me out.
As well as the
we're insisting that our analysis is correct, and it's ugly.
The chart on the line, the yellow line takes the chart on the left.
And what types of jobs are being created? If you leave a salary job, not even a great job, but a decent salary job that gives you the flexibility you need to work from home, and then you take on freelance work through rentner.com, like a lot of my graduate school friends have done right now, You're not counted in any of
their
this.
hotels and occupy those hotels.
There
So
are a
just
whole
didn't
lot of
support the same
underemployed people
type
right
of
now
room rate
seeking things
that they've
through
done in the past.
TaskRabbit or
slide.
OnlyFans, and there's no judgment there. But they are
Don't
not
wanna
part of
lose
this
sight
calculation
of
because
housing
they're saying
prices.
how
And
you
we've
get your
not
money means
talked
you
about
don't
this
matter to
stat very
us.
much. It was really a
And that
statistic
is wrong
that,
because you're still paying
we
taxes.
kept an eye on during
If
the
I don't
housing
matter, don't
bubble
take my
that
taxes.
occurred during the Great Recession. But I wanted to acknowledge that this is something that we continue to watch and keep an eye on in terms of what is the value of housing prices in Denver.
How about
and the
those who
Denver
cannot
metro area.
afford
So
to
this
own
is
homes?
the
How
Case-Shiller
many
Home Price
individuals
Index.
were seeking to
And there
purchase
is a
homes?
composite of 20 cities.
Do you
I don't have the
understand how
list
much
with
money
me
it takes
today,
to
but
buy a
I
house?
often get a
I
question
could not
about
afford to buy
what
a
are the other 20
house
cities, and we'll
until
make sure that we get that out.
2014, and only
But
because
that's
my
a
husband is a
composite that
veteran and we
tracks
got it no
other
money down.
large, urban areas compared to Denver, and you see where we had stronger housing prices than that composite of the other 20 areas.
We also
And
have,
that trend has
that's
just
why I get so
recently
angry about
crossed,
this too. So the housing
in,
metric was
about
part of
February
economic growth.
and,
It was what we were trying to do to
March
create
of this
stability
year, and we're
in a
about
very
at
conservative
4%
era.
versus the
When we
composite at
said
3%.
that
So this
the
is something
house
that
and the
we keep an
family
eye
is the
on.
cornerstone of the community and of the
Sold
city.
price, so
It is
this is not
important
our
that
median
people
value,
own
and I'll talk
homes.
about that a
That's
little bit
from the
later. This is
60s.
not one and the
And
same.
then we made
We
it
have an assessed
impossible for
value,
certain people to
and
try to buy homes because it's like, oh, we weren't talking about you black people. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And it has just exploded. So that's why this is gross and egregious. We should be looking at the number of people who still could not afford to buy a home if they saved and lived in their parents' basement for 10 years.
And if I had thought about
We're not calculating that number. It's called calculus. The people that home prices do the inverse. Show me the area underneath. Instead of calculating that area underneath, show me, let's calculate the value of the area above it.
How did people who were on
That's the number we need to be caring about, not whether or not we can push that line up with some accounting tricks.
A blue and a yellow line here, and it tracks what is the financial and spending patterns of someone who remained employed versus someone who was unemployed during this pandemic period, while the $600 of extra benefit was available. What is really
did the $600 boost the economy? Did it make that line go up? They're not asking, did that $600 improve their quality of life? What did it help them survive?
So one is full spending.
Did they still have to go to
before,
food banks?
The pandemic, and then 0.8 would be a 20% reduction in spending. What you then see is when unemployment benefits kick in. So that's where zero is when that first benefit is available. That those folks who had that unemployment, that extra benefit, were spending in that first period near at 100% of what they had spent before, and then had actually been spending more than they had prior to becoming unemployed. And this goes to show exactly what the benefit was to our economy when it comes to people spending money. So this is different, though, than the federal stimulus check. People were banking that check. They were using it for savings or paying down debt or using it for household purposes. This is actually an indication that with that extra $600, people were spending those benefits as they came in, and I think helped prop up the economy during this period of time. So
they propped up the economy, but it made the economy better off, but it didn't make them any more stable or more secure.
Congress has taken no action to extend that benefit. What is going to be the long-term effect of those people as that benefit has run out?
It kept them above the poverty line. Again, we're talking about numbers. It kept that many families above the declared line of poverty.
So,
but again, it's like $15,000 for a single person. It's a low number.
Indicator, but also a key agency-related revenue category. So what you see in this chart is...
Because we're also not tracking the number of people who need to have multiple jobs in order to make ends meet. That's the number I want to track. That's the number I want to see falling. We don't care about that. We're looking at this completely incorrectly and have been for decades.
An interesting part about this slide is if you were to look back during the Great Recession, what we saw was actually permits issued increasing, but the valuation continued to decrease. And that's because people were choosing to stay in their homes. You know, when we had the housing bubble and valuations fell out, people chose to stay and reinvest in their homes rather than looking to move. We don't see that here. We see both negative in terms of permits issued, as well as.
All right, I have to go get ready and out the door for my 10 a.m. I'll be back around 11:30. I'm going to leave this running until then. And hopefully it won't change. If it does change, hello, Cody. Welcome.
This kind of trend continue.
Love seeing you here. All right, so I'm going to have to go get ready. I'm going to leave this running while I go to my meeting. When I come back, I'll resume the position. I'll be here all day long. One other thing to know about, if you are a big believer in defunding, I am an abolitionist. When I call myself that, I'm not just a carceral abolitionist. I'm an abolitionist, period. But Ruth Wilson Gilmore is one of the leaders in the movement. She does not speak publicly very often, and she's doing so tonight in New York. I've got tickets online for it, and I will be sharing and live streaming it here too, because we all need a break once in a while from the boring to be inspired, and few things inspire me more than Ruth Wilson Gilmore. So yeah, there's that. I will, so mark your calendars. It's at 6 p.m. our time tonight. I will share,
as I mentioned before,
what I could afford to buy into, which all, with the world. Again, she's amazing. She was doing this to raise funds. I don't remember what for. It feels like everybody's fundraising right now. But also, here's another one. If y'all don't follow this guy, you need to follow this guy because he's a gem. He is one of my protest kids. I can't say enough good things about him. I can talk about how good he is all day long. Follow this guy. Pay attention when he speaks. This is a golden dude.
And I'll start on the right-hand side of the chart. Zero.
Did I embarrass you? Sorry, I'm a mom. That's what I do when I'm proud of my babies.
Where were we at
You're a good
pre-pandemic?
guy, Cody.
So you would assume that
Exactly.
number would
What's good?
bounce around
Cody's
zero
good.
because,
That's what's good.
we're not seeing a terribly large number of.
There's no recovery coming, guys.
Openings or closings.
That's why we need to measure the area instead of looking at the line itself. We need to be comparing the area underneath the line to the area above it. That's calculus. That's what calculus would do. Which again, not to say calculus is the answer. But what I'm trying to say is when we're watching a line rise and fall, that's not appropriate analysis when we're looking at something as wide as the economy and as fallible as a single data point.
So that's something that we're tracking just because.
All right, I really got to change. I'm going to be late.
Hospitality make up so much of our economic profile. We are seeing some improvement in the education and health services, but I think that that's probably no surprise considering that we are in a pandemic, a public health related environment where those facilities would be opening during this time period. Next slide. So is the economy improving? And I've added this slide into, I think, each of the previous 5 decks. And what we're modeling here is the green scenario. So scenario 2, this is July revision. And what you see is that prolonged U recovery over a longer period of time. We had previous models, specifically that I presented in the past in May, that yellow line that was more severe earlier on and then kind of came back in a little faster of a fashion. What we've seen is the low not being so low, but then the recovery taking a longer period of time. We are also looking at, and Council President Gilmore actually asked me the other day, well, how do we think about what is that most concerning of scenarios? And that's scenario 3. We have some more work to do here. This is going to be kind of a constant update because the more information we get about how the virus might resurge is going to change what scenario 3 looks like. So I think we're going to have to continue to watch this, but I've got some stats when we get to the Q&A period of time as to what that impact might be. But you're looking at a more negative consequence to specifically our sales and use tax as we go through this period. If we were to see a resurgence and it would specifically cause or result in the need to have to go back to stay at home, if that were to happen, we would see a significant impact to our sales and use tax. Next slide. I'd like to take a minute here. This is kind of a new slide because the last time I presented Councilwoman Sawyer actually asked a number of good kind of framing questions about how is finance thinking about this challenge? What things could go well? What things could go poorly? And how should we as a city think about those circumstances? So what are the I know it's odd to think upside risks, but like what are the upside? What are the positive things that could improve where we're at this point in time? The vaccine becomes widely available. No surprise there. If it becomes widely available and is administered, I think it gives folks a jolt of confidence that they can kind of return to some semblance of normality. Or a new therapeutic mitigates a lot of the health challenges. Again, probably provides some of the same confidence that a vaccine does. Economic growth momentum from May through August is sustained. So this is when I was
take screenshot of that, y'all. Look at these
stats,
assumptions. Do they seem rational
kind of,
to
where is
you?
this going to go?
Overly optimistic?
Trend down,
who do they serve?
Our employment position, or
do these assumptions make sense to you? Do they serve you?
If we continue on
all
this
right.
trend, we could be in a better proposition, but we just don't know.
I'm going to turn my camera off so my husband can
like.
run around
Lastly,
naked like he wants to, and then I'll come back later.
I'd spoken a little bit more about yesterday, which is additional federal stimulus being passed. I think the ability to inject more benefits like that unemployment benefit, that extra $600 back into the economy, that would be a great factor for all communities across the country, because that is more money that would be put into the economy. But I would also say for us, I would like to see some federal relief when it comes to revenue recovery. I've gotten a lot of questions from the public. Hey, you receive these federal dollars. Why isn't this making your budget situation better? We're precluded from using it as revenue replacement. So we could tie it back, the use of those funds back to our emergency response, but we're not just able to say, hey, we had a $220 million impact in 2020 due to COVID. We're going to just fill in part of our budget gap using those dollars. So something that's more flexible, as well as additional benefits provided by federal stimulus. Let's skip the baseline, because I think that's what we've talked about a lot, and just talk about downside risks. I've mentioned it already multiple times, but a virus resurgence, and specifically the requirement of shutdown, vaccine development that is delayed or that people have a lack of confidence in. I think we've been hearing a lot of stories about people being anxious about taking a vaccine that they don't feel was well tested. So I think making sure that there is public trust in the vaccine process is really important. Job growth that stalls and unemployment that remains high. Again, that is a factor of the previous two conditions. A drop off in consumer spending. So I think if folks are concerned about the fall, if they're concerned about resurgence, if they're concerned about a virus not being available, then they will be less likely to spend, and they will be more likely to save and provide a safety net for themselves. And then inequitable economic growth. And I think I mentioned yesterday a K-shaped recovery, where some folks, some businesses, some people in the economy are experiencing a recovery, while others are being left behind in a more divergent fashion than we've even seen after the Great Recession. And that inequitable economic recovery could result in, again, suppressed consumer spending, unemployment, the need for additional benefits, and then geopolitical risks. We're not an island here in Denver or in the state of Colorado or even internationally. If there's a massive resurgence in some of these other areas internationally, we will likely feel that eventually. Next slide. So just some optimistic signals. So I want to make sure that we're being measured when we talk about where do we stand. We saw some better than expected single-digit August national unemployment rate numbers, so that was positive. Businesses are moving forward with reopening, again, positive. Home sales are strong. Home construction is back to pre-pandemic levels, and consumer spending levels over the summer were better than expected. We are, on the concerning side, seeing slower job growth with jobless claims remaining higher, kind of stubbornly higher. Lack of additional federal stimulus has been a challenge for sure. Continued restrictions on restaurants, entertainment, and personal services. So that is really an impact here when you think about Denver and that dependence on tourism and hospitality. Those restrictions, with good reason, public health reasons, are a restriction to economic production for those businesses. Again, signs of an inequitable economic recovery are an undercurrent. That term of a K-shaped recovery is becoming more prominent. And then considerable uncertainty remains. Like I said, we just don't know what the next 2 to 4 quarters is going to hold. Next slide. So what should, again, kind of to Councilwoman Sawyer's point, how do we kind of think to the horizon, look to the horizon, and think about what we're going to be experiencing here? Again, ongoing public health crisis is going to probably weigh on the economic recovery, but it's really going to be dependent on therapeutics and a vaccine. What we don't know really is, are we in a new normal recession? This is a recession like any other, because it's connected to a public health crisis. What is this recession? How is it going to be felt over multiple quarters? There's just a lot of uncertainty. Labor market is expected to improve from its current state, but could unemployment levels remain higher, certainly higher than pre-pandemic levels through 2022? Visit Denver expects lodging tax collections to remain below 2019 levels as we look into 2022, as that consumer confidence takes some time to rebound. And then we're going to have to look to property valuations, specifically on commercial property. I think there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to what is the new normal when it comes to going to work and working from home, and what does that mean for the activation of our commercial space, and therefore what is the value of that commercial space as we move forward. Next slide. Takeaways as we move into revenue. So our projected revenue impact is $220 million in 2020. It's the worst drop since 1933. And I wish I had provided this stat, but I think this is the right audience for it. So let's wrap our heads around, what does $220 million fund in our original 2020 budget? It funds the general fund operating budgets, Parks and Rec, community planning and development, our library, trash collection, public health and environment, human rights and community partnership, and the climate office. That is what $220 million means to that original operating budget. And that is just the gravity of the challenge that we're faced here. And that we are solving this year through a series of measures that we've presented on recently. At the same time, agencies were working through their 2021 budget at approximately $190 million gap, because the revenue, although it is recovering, it is still approximately $157 million lower than our original 2020 budget was. So although it's coming back, and I'll talk about this here in a second, we're seeing positive trends in terms of revenue recovery. It still is not at near 2020 levels that we built our budget off of originally. Next slide. This is just a comparison. There were some questions about, well, how did this compare to the Great Recession, and how did those numbers roll out? So 2009 through 2012, $446 million worth of budget gaps. We actually did work on solving a budget gap in 2013, but thankfully in 2012, ballot measure 2A was passed, and it allowed us to restore many of the cuts that we were preparing to take as part of that budget development process, because in the past I've used $550 million, but 2A allowed us to restore those services. And then on the right-hand side of your screen is what we're dealing with and the magnitude that we're dealing with right now. The savings proposals and the use of reserves in 2020 and the $190 million in 2021. Next slide. So revenue forecast. Next slide, please. I'm gonna just speak briefly to these slides so we have sufficient time for questions. 2020 revised forecast. So we went from $1.485 million of revenue forecasted originally for 2020. We're at $1.265 billion. It is a loss of $220 million, or 10% under 2019, but an important stat to remember is it's 14.6%, or almost 15% below the original 2020 budget. The impacts are led by sales tax, lodgers, occupational privilege tax, parking, construction-related fees and charges, and traffic court fines. In 2021, our original forecast is $1.32 billion. It reflects growth of $62.8 million, or approximately 5%. We have key contributors being sales and use tax at 15.3, property tax at 7.6, lodgers tax at 50, OPT at 7.6, parking at 44. Those are kind of the major highlights. I did want to just pause for a second and just acknowledge the fact that we have some inside mechanics to the budget that are going on that actually have drawn this number down a little bit. This number of 5% would have been closer to 9 had we not carved out our internal staffing that's in the general fund, in human services, in human resources, in the city attorney's office, and police and fire. We have 4 groups of employees that support our human services operation and the airport. They've traditionally been budgeted inside the general fund, and then the airport and human services provide us revenue back to the general fund. The challenge with that practice is that it requires that we set aside contingency and fund balance for functions that are otherwise paid for by other organizations. So we carve that out and put it in its own fund as part of the 2021 budget process, saving $7.5 million in contingency and reserves. That would have meant if we had kept that revenue profile in, and we would have to keep the expenditure profile in as well, our growth rate in revenue would be approximately $9 million. Next slide, please. So some high-level stats, and I've kind of read through these, but I think the graphs actually demonstrate a comparison between 2009, that first worst year of the Great Recession, versus 2020. And what you're going to see here on each of these slides is a proposition that's far more challenging than we saw during the Great Recession. 6.4% overall loss in 2009, 10.1 in 2020 versus 2019. But remember, versus our original forecast, that was nearly 15%. And then a recovery of that of 5%. Thanks, Zach. You keep going. Sales and use tax. Loss of 11.6% over 2019. 2009, negative 10%. Again, we see an increase of 15.3% from 2020 to 2021. Again, stronger numbers, but still these numbers don't represent 2019 levels of revenue performance until the end of 2021 for sales and use tax. Next slide. This is a chart we have not had to show for a very long time because it's a show of trend in our monthly trend for sales and use tax collections. You see the most shocking number was there in March activity at negative 27%. Over the past few months, we've been hovering around 12% down. That's actually incrementally better than what we thought it was going to be. We were looking at numbers that hovered between 15 to 19%, and we were at 12. So that's I've said to a few folks, we've seen some less bad numbers. It's hard to really brag about 12% down, but compared to where our forecast was, it's something that's positive. Next slide. Occupational privilege tax. So this is that other folks have termed it a head tax, $9.75 per employee per month in the city. 1-to-1 factor driven here by employment. Again, 11% decline compared to the 8% decline in 2009, and then some recovery in 2021, but still we're a few years behind. We're closer to 2018 levels of revenue performance in this revenue category. Next slide. Lodgers tax has been impacted significantly. This comes as no surprise considering that lodging activity slide I had in our economic overview. Negative 66%. That is going from $35 million worth of performance to a forecasted $11.7 million of performance in 2020. Again, we look at 2021, a 50% improvement over our forecast in 2020. The challenge is that the base in 2020 is so much lower than it was in 2019. 50% does not, that only gets you to 50, it gets you half as much revenue as it generated for the city in 2019. Next slide. 2C's excise tax transfer to the general fund. This also has a nexus with our lodging activity. So as part of our overall revenue stream, we get a share back of that 2C waterfall. So this excise tax waterfall, we had reserves that were sufficient to make sure that we maintain our revenue proposition in 2020. But the impacts of lodgers on this waterfall are also impacting that transfer back to the general fund in 2021. So $42 million versus 19 in 2021. That's a nearly 55% loss. Thank you. Some other increases, some other revenue items inside of the budget. 2 downtown tax increment financing districts are expiring in 2021. And those sales taxes are returning to the city. I didn't have the number when I typed up the slide. It's $2.6 million for the general fund. New sales tax revenue associated with out-of-state retailers. So the state has established a system by which outside of state retailers can remit taxes to the state that are owed to local jurisdictions. We're going to be advancing an ordinance here in the coming months to leverage that state system. We believe the estimate of that revenue benefit is about $14 million. Online convenience fee of $3 million. And then for the general fund, property tax mill increase. So this actually goes back to 2A as well. We have the ability in non-reassessment years to restore credited mills. We have not done this at all, except one time for a $0.5 mil for the Affordable Housing Fund. This is 0.448 credited mills to be restored for the general fund, enabling property tax growth. Up to the 2A allowable cap, it totals $9 million of what would have otherwise been service cuts. Next slide. Some agency generated revenue increases. So parking revenue, you might have remembered that was one of the areas of weakness in 2020. $10.5 million. This is assuming that there is some return to normalcy as we move through 2021 rather. Parks and rec fees. Our facilities have been closed. People have not had memberships, and we've refunded memberships for our recreation centers. This is those facilities being reactivated. I mentioned the online convenience fee at $3.3 million, and we would not be absorbing the cost of those convenience fees because they're still charged. It just depends on who pays it. And then court research fee, which I mentioned yesterday. This is to bring Denver's fees for researching court records to the same rate that the state is charging. Next slide. I did want to just take a minute and provide this overview of what these credits are for not just the general fund. We're looking at general fund, CIP, human services, and affordable housing. When you total up this 0.732 here at the bottom of this slide, the average impact for the median homeowner is $23 for the year. The 0.448 for the general fund alone is $14. The net impact across all of these funds is $15. The capital improvement fund is associated with the 2A paving of streets. So we're trying to convert that commitment over to a millage over in the CIP program. Human services, that $3 million, we're going to talk about it here in a little bit, but there was a note made about increasing the property tax rebate program, increasing eviction assistance, and cash payments for people who are on TANF. Each of those 3 items in human services totaled $1 million each. It is directly associated with this mill. And then the Affordable Housing Fund, the linkage fees that are anticipated to be collected have gone under a significant shock because of that trend in permit valuation. We thought it was prudent to demonstrate our commitment to affordable housing to make sure that we activated this increment of mills that was available to the Affordable Housing Fund. Next slide. There are a lot of numbers on this slide. I've not presented this for a long time because it's a lot of minutia to get into, but I did. This is a page inside of the budget book that I wanted to make sure that we just covered briefly. What this does is it compares where we closed each of the budget years in 17, 18, and 19 I wanted to make sure we acknowledged our revenue proposition and our spending proposition in the 2020 budget and where it started, and how that contrasts to where our revenue proposition for 2020's revised budget is. I did want to call out that we are still working on identifying $18 million worth of savings in 2020. That could be achieved in a few ways: additional agency generated savings, savings in our contingency fund, savings that could be generated by it would be attributing costs, eligible costs that the city has incurred in the general fund to our federal fund. So while it's not a revenue replacement, we can use it to attribute emergency spending against. I also wanted to acknowledge the use of fund balance. So we started the year in 2020 forecasting. This was not the original budget. This is based off of actually how we closed 19. We didn't have this number at that point in time. So 257 million is where we closed 2019. That meant that we had 17.1% of reserves. We're using 5.1% of those to close this budget. So 94.7 total. The net is 91 million. So we have $163 million in our reserves, 160 in 2021. Still trying to maintain that 12% reserve in this situation where we see revenue shocks related to a resurgence, lack of confidence in this vaccine, all of those kind of elements, trying to maintain that safety net as we move through the year. We also have $13 million worth of additional budget savings set aside in 2021. We thought a portion of this could come from collective bargaining concessions. If that is not the case, then we will also be looking for additional reduction proposals to fill that amount. Next slide. And with that, I will conclude my talking points and turn it over to Stephanie Adams. Thank you.
Okay. No echo. Got it. Okay. Hi, everybody. I am back for a few more slides. I had said I was going to come back and talk to you a little bit about the general fund, the 2021 budget. I'm going to focus on the general fund mostly. There are some other highlights we'll talk a little bit about, but I just want to remind everybody you'll be hearing from Human Services, which is not a general fund agency, and the airport in your hearings, which is also not a general fund agency. And there are others, obviously, in the budget book. So just a quick couple of slides, and I'm going to invite my friends from the Office of Social Equity and Innovation to talk a little bit about their role and guidance and leadership as we develop the 2021 budget proposal. The 2021 budget manages the uncertainty of continuing public health and economic conditions with our obligation to serve the community and keep us on a path toward rebuilding our local economy in a way that is sustainable and equitable. Next slide, Zach. We really did start the budget conversation thinking a little bit about the decisions that we were going to have to make, and we knew going in that there would be some very difficult and tough decisions. But we wanted to understand how the decisions that we were going to have to make, mostly reductions, how that would impact our under-resourced communities. And we really tapped into the expertise of our OSEI team. I'm going to talk a little bit about the icons here at the very bottom. I mean, these are not in any particular order. Balancing the budget is not an optional guidepost for us. I just want to remind everyone that we are required by charter to have a balanced budget. Brendan talked a little bit about the 12% reserves. I think he probably mentioned this, but a reminder that our goal is 15%. 10% is our floor. We have both built the 2020 budget with a 12% in mind, and for 2021. Mitigating equity impacts, there was a lot of work that we did individually with agencies, both through trainings and individual meetings, to make sure that we were fully understanding what our options were around some of the impacts to our communities. We wanted to minimize the impact to employees. We can't possibly overemphasize that employees are the lifeblood of everything we do. They are public servants, and because they serve, we need those folks to be out there serving people. And we recognize that this budget, with the vacancies that we have, with the reductions in resources, puts additional pressure on our employees. Permanent versus, this is about the conversation about 2021, right? We're talking about that, but you can see in the budget book, the decisions that we made in 2020 impact 2021. The decisions that we make in 2021 will impact 2022 and beyond. And it's very important to address what's right in front of us and to understand that we have an obligation to the long term, to everyone who comes behind us, to make sure that we're thinking about the things that we do today and how that impacts us and them. And then to the best of our ability, and I am under no illusion, and hopefully you are not either, that the kind of cuts that we're talking about, while we did our best to limit service impacts, the depth of what we had to do will likely have some impacts in terms of hours, and again, just stretching our teams thin in terms of their ability to respond in a manner that we're accustomed to. Go to the next slide. So I'm going to actually turn this over to Kim Desmond and Tariana Navas, who were key partners as we worked through our 2021 budget. So Zach, I don't know if you can promote them or they can just turn their videos on.
I think we've already got them in the queue, so they're ready to go, and we're doing great as far as time, and also want to acknowledge Councilwoman Ortega has been with us throughout the presentation as well, and so we'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Kim.
Thank you, Council President Gilmore, and to all the council members on the call, and thank you, Stephanie, for turning it over to us, and just shout out to everyone in the budget management office. We most certainly have been dancing in their world for the last few months, and I can tell you the work that they do it's very intense. So shout out to Brendan and Stephanie and team and Tara Olden for all the things they've done to support us. And so before we get started, I want to first and foremost acknowledge our team, Aaron Brown, our fierce leader and our equity officer, as well as the mayor's staff, and also Jessica Calderon and Michelle Garcia, who are learning and development and all things coaching for our agencies, and also Jose Rosales from HRCP, who provides us with coordination support. So today you're going to hear from me and Tiriana, but wanted to formally acknowledge all the work that our team has done as they play a vital role in supporting coaching and looking at our equity framework with the agencies. So as you heard from the presentation from Brendan and Stephanie, to close the $220 million gap, we wanted to make sure that we deployed multiple tools to minimize the impacts. And one of those tools was a budget equity framework. So that was one of many tools in our toolbox. In our office, we worked alongside the budget team as well as all city agencies. And we also considered how equity is a key decision point as we're looking at ways to address any budget adjustments, any budget decisions, and we want to be clear about how we are looking at these adjustments and the impact to traditionally marginalized people of color, First Nations, Indigenous folks, and as well as our under-resourced communities. And so with that, we wanted to make sure that we are clear about identifying clear, actionable mitigation strategies, which created a path forward to reduce any impact or harm to prevent any disruption to the folks in our city. As our mayor always states, we're a world-class city, and we want to make sure that in that, everyone is considered and prioritized as we're making key decisions. And so our goal with our work was to make sure that we provided a decision-making budget equity tool for all of our city agencies to balance their budget priorities and adjustments to make sure we're making inclusive decisions to meet the demands that were presented as a result of this budget. Our opportunity was to make sure that these adjustments were prioritized and that we were most certainly producing equitable results, and that we were not disrupting any services. And those types of services include not only Parks and Rec, but our Denver Public Library. So our goal was to make sure that these services were not impacting folks that historically have been marginalized in our community, which are communities of color. We wanted to also make sure that our agencies had a tool to actually operationalize the process into their decisions to meet and allocate the resources as there are various needs across our city. And so you're going to hear briefly some of that from Tariana today around the process we deployed in these endeavors. So I'll pass it to Tariana to go into the next slide to talk about how we prepared our city agency for this conversation.
Thank you, Kim. And I also want to acknowledge the budget team, of course, but City Council, I think we had, you may remember when we had an initial meeting, seems like a lifetime ago, in which we actually went into very specifics of what it means to bring an equity lens and bring equity practices. And thank you, Council President Gilmore. We also had another meeting, you remember, in which we agreed, right, that this is not meant to be one slide, right? This is meant to be a perspective, a lens, a practice that goes throughout the entire process. So with that in mind, in preparation for the budgeting process, we worked, as Kim said, with every agency. And to establish a framework for the work, it is critical that there is an understanding of the role of government as part of and responsible for institutional structural racism historically. And I say that is important for that context because we cannot assume that every human right in the city is aware and understands that context. So we are very committed to that government laws, policy systems have caused racial inequities. And along with this historic context, we also incorporated foundational concepts such as unconscious bias, for example, that must be checked when evaluating and making budgetary determinations. So this is not just high-level information, but really practices and skills that must be taken into consideration when evaluating, assessing, and making budgetary determinations. So the goal for us is to build skills and equity practices to assess the impacts of all budgetary considerations during the process, so prior to budget decisions. And we create a practice that we developed as part of, like Kimba said, an equity framework. As we move into the next slide, some of that really was about when we look at potential adjustments, potential reductions, we work with agencies to look at who would benefit or who would be affected, specifically historically marginalized groups, communities of color, First Nation and Indigenous people, older adults, and other, again, historically marginalized communities. We also look through the lens of neighborhoods. Not every neighborhood is the same, and every neighborhood may also have different needs. And so we looked at the potential consequences, how to mitigate and address those potential effects. And I think something that I'm very proud of is we were really intentionally breaking silos between agencies. So we are looking at really an overview, right, of how different agencies and different services impact a community and how we can actually come together as a city and bring agencies together in acknowledging and addressing different needs. And as Stephanie and Brendan has said, what we, 2020 impacts 2021, 2021 impacts 2022. So for us, the work doesn't stop now, right, after a budget decision is made, but really it's about how do we monitor, evaluate over time so that it can continuously guide us, right? Equity is a practice, it's a journey, it's not something that we achieve. So for us, it will be a continuous monitoring and evaluation of these decisions and the impacts on communities to see how we can continue, revise and review as we look at 2022. So with that, I'll pass the microphone back to Kimberly to address what's next.
I think it's the first time you called me Kimberly. So just
I think so too. It's a virtual thing.
Yeah, so in closing, just letting you all know that our team, we provided intense coaching. We sat down and we literally looked at a feedback process to make sure that we were providing concise opportunities to address mitigations or concerns, and we did so in partnership with every agency. And so just know that we met literally with every agency continually. It was literally, it felt like an everyday journey. And so our team was right alongside our BMO partners and every agency providing coaching, making sure that folks were clear about the things they were putting in front of the administration. And so lots of back and forth, but know that there was lots of feedback that was given in between, lots of spreadsheets that we were able to provide feedback and literally direct consultation. So shout out to our team for doing that. And also looking at other variables with our capital planning. We looked at equity in that process as well, and we looked at our access to opportunity map and some ways to make sure that we are being accessible throughout that process as well. So you're going to hear more about that from Laura Perry later on. So just know that our team was intricately involved, and we look forward to continually supporting our agencies. We're looking at ways to respond to tough decisions as our city budget is very interconnected. All of our cities are interconnected, and we want to make sure that we're doing things responsibly. So thank you for your time, and we'll be around for any questions.
Okay, I'm up. So again, I just want to thank Kim, Tariana, the whole team, Aaron Brown. What you might have picked up on, there was a lot of work and a lot of meetings, and there was a lot of one-on-one work that Kim and Tariana in particular, Aaron did. So thank you for being part of this journey. It has been a very intense one. And in the meantime, the OSCI team was also training people along the way. So this was not the only thing that they were doing. So thank you for all of your time and energy that you put into the budget. So I'm going to talk about, usually I don't spend as much time around key reductions, but this is the year. And I think that what we asked agencies to do is really think through when they come talk to you about preservation, right? Oftentimes, certainly since I've been the budget director, we've talked a lot about, oh, here are the key investments, additional investments that we're making. And I am going to talk about a couple increases, mostly mandatory increases that we were able to make in 2021. But when we thought about the challenge that we had ahead of us, it was really about thinking through what is it that we need to preserve, recognizing that this was a year where we needed to make some reductions. So you can see ahead of it in front of you that there are a couple of key reductions. This is not the totality. You won't be able to add this up to 154, but this really does highlight some of the larger impacts that we know that the reductions that you'll see in 2021. The first and foremost, and we've kind of been alluding to it, but this puts some real numbers to what we're talking about. $39 million of savings were achieved through 400 fewer positions, not employees, right? There are no layoffs in this 2021 budget for the general fund. It is really that we had vacant positions. I think all are well aware of the fact that we have been slowing down on hiring this year. I'm going to talk a little bit. Part of that 400 is also the incentive program for our folks who were eligible to retire. I'll talk a little quick slide about that just to give some of the facts behind it. There's just, I can't get past this bullet without saying that we recognize the impacts that this is going to have on our team when you have fewer colleagues and your workload isn't necessarily decreasing significantly. Laura Perry will talk a little bit about some of the investments we're going to make in the capital improvement program. This is a good example, a sad but good example of where we have over the years when we recognize that we had revenue that were one time in nature. We recognize that there are places where we make transfers, for instance, to capital improvements. And we have said many times, if the economy was to get bad, this is one of the very first places we would pull back. And so that is what we are doing for 2021. We are the same, by the way, in 2020, that we are not making an additional investment out of the general fund towards capital improvement. Now, capital improvement has other sources of funding as well. The general fund has been a great boost to that, but Laura will talk a little bit more about that. We do have, and you'll hear a lot about it on Friday, that our uniform colleagues came to the table with reducing spending and overtime, smaller recruit classes, and so there are some savings to be had in the 2021 budget as a result of those proposals. We are hopeful and anticipate that in 2021, through our experience in 2020, that we will have a lower jail population. So our colleagues in the sheriff department identified about $3.2 million worth of savings as a result of having fewer people in our jail. Last night we had an employee town hall, and the mayor shared with employees that we will be implementing furlough days in 2021. Council President Gilmore alluded to that at the very beginning. I have a slide on that as well to go into a little bit more detail. One of the other transfers that we make out of the general fund is to our fleet replacement. We have pulled back on the amount of dollars that we're investing in fleet replacement for 2021. We will still be investing some dollars, but not to the same extent that we have in past years. Laura also will talk probably a little bit about the fact that we have the legal ability to transfer expenditures related to capital projects, both in the GEO bond as well as our regular capital improvement program. And so we are leveraging that tool. Again, this is a tool that should sound familiar to many of you because it's come up before, and we have said we are holding on to this tool at a time when we absolutely need it. We are also, you're going to see about almost $4 million of utility and facility maintenance savings. Now, we did realize a considerable amount of savings this year because people are not in a lot of our buildings, but we are looking to pull back on some of that spending in 2021. Our technology services team evaluated what they needed in terms of equipment and projects and different kinds of licensing, and were able to identify $7 million of savings in 2021. And then finally, this is actually the point that Brendan made earlier. So we did make an accounting change, a significant accounting change, whereby we did move expenditures associated with the enterprise fund, the airport, and also human services. Again, it was an expenditure that we had, and we had the revenue to offset it, but because it was part of our bottom line, we were also adding, it was contributing to our percentage around fund balance and adding to our actual contingency. And so by making just that move, no changes in services, no changes in the fact that both of those entities will continue to fully pay for those resources, we were able to save over $7 million there. Next slide. So last night we did talk to city employees about some of the specific impacts to city employees. We keep talking about how important city employees are. And so I wanted to just walk through some of the things that we, talked about as part of the budget process. The first thing is that little quick trip down memory lane. As part of the 2020 budget, our colleagues at DERP, or the Denver Employee Retirement Program, did their actuarial assessment and as a result of the outstanding liability, had come to the city to say that they needed an increase in contributions of about 3.5%. In 2019, for the 2020 budget, we had split that cost down the middle, half being paid by the city and half being paid by employees. At the end of 2019, we did pay forward about 1% of the city's portion of that contribution at the end of 2019, thereby alleviating employees of having to pay that full contribution, increased contribution in 2020. With the intention, quite honestly, of evaluating that and possibly having that percent come back over to employees in 2021. We heard from employees, we recognized the importance of the stability of our DIRT program, and so we did budget for 2021. The city will be taking on that shift. That increase will still occur. That shift will actually be being taken on by the city, by the employer. That number is a little bit large because it also includes an additional payment that we will be making to DIRP around unfunded liability as a result of the special incentive retirement program. Because we have a lot of folks who are going from, I sort of think of it this way, instead of contributing to, instead of givers to our retirement program, they are now takers. And oftentimes we backfill those people, right? If someone comes in, they can start to take over the contributions. But because we intentionally had the incentive program is to make sure that we can save dollars. The only way to save dollars is to not backfill those positions. So we will work with DIRP in early next year to understand what that dollar amount is. We have put in a preliminary dollar amount into the budget for next year to make that payment to them, but we will refine that as they do their actuarial study early next year. There was a savings in health insurance, but it was not because we made any changes specifically to the contribution. So we've maintained the city's contributions at the percentages that they are today. For next year, we didn't make any major plan designs. One of our providers, Denver Health, made some adjustments to the way that they're delivering services, and so that contributed to a lower overall health insurance contribution that would have to be made by the city. But city employees will not be, for instance, taking on more of their health insurance contribution. Hopefully many of you are familiar with the health savings account. So that is, if you do have a high deductible plan, we do have a health savings account, and we encourage employees to contribute to that by providing a 3-to-1 match. It varies depending on whether or not you're someone who's a single payer, or if you're paying on behalf of a family, but we haven't made any changes to that. Furloughs, I'll talk some more about the details about that in a moment. We are not budgeting merit in 2021. Based upon our ability to pay and, quite frankly, the fluctuation in the market, we really wanted to, this is one of the things that we really had to give up, I think, for 2021. The Eco Pass is the same. We didn't make any adjustments or changes to that. We are suspending the education refund program for 2021, hoping to revisit that in later years. Next slide, Zach. I do want to let you know what's sitting inside of the 2021 budget as it relates to uniform compensation. We don't have any increases to salary health for police or sheriff because we do not have a signed agreement with either of those two entities. We did negotiate some time ago with fire, and so they had negotiated a multi-year contract, and so because we had signed on that contract, right now in the budget we do have about $4.6 million based upon the legal contract that we signed with them. Next slide. So there's a little bit of detail about the furloughs. So what we have established for 2021 is we will have 4 fixed furlough days. Couple long weekends, Christmas, a new holiday we're calling Christmas Eve, because Christmas Eve does fall on a Friday. And then on top of that, this year what we heard is that people really did appreciate the flexible furlough days. And so what we have done is, so essentially employees who are making less than $51,999 will have a totality of 6 furlough days. 2 of those days will be flexible. The other 4 remaining will be the scheduled furlough days. And you can sort of read through there, then it increases in terms of the number of flexible days. So folks who are making between 52 and 86.99 will be in totality taking 7 days, 4 of those being fixed, the 3 flexible. Those folks who are making $87,000 or more will have half and half. There'll be fixed days and then 4 flexible days. The mayor, who I just saw popped up on the video, I don't know if you want to jump in, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, Stephanie, thank you for this. I just want to put a pin in this because I want council members to see you just listen to Tatiana and Kim, Desmond. This is a reflection of the city really acknowledging, all of us acknowledging that even in every policy we make, there's a question of equity. And I was not comfortable with the value in 2020 that we did across the board cuts, or excuse me, furloughs, and we didn't really spice it with the value, or at least underlying value of equity. And I think 2021 we had a chance to get in front of it, and this is a reflection of that. I think you're going to see more cities and probably the state move in this direction who that have to implement furlough. So I just wanted to make that point, Steph. Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership on this, Mr. Mayor. I do want to just point out to those of you who are listening who are employees, we did this year for the 8 furlough days, if it made more sense for your city operations to make them all floating means flexible, and allow you and your supervisor to schedule all of them, we can do that as well. That we're not changing that particular value. I also want to, for any employees who are listening to, you could take your flexible days in 4-hour increments. We think that helps lighten the burden a little bit on folks as well. Those are all of my points. Thank you. I did say I was going to talk about the SIP. This is the special incentive program for eligible retirees. We really, again, focus a lot on the general fund, but in the general fund, about 181 employees enrolled. We have talked with agencies. We do know that there are about 65 that we are going to have to backfill, but the intention for 2021 is that we will not be backfilling this, about 116. That equates to total salary savings of over $12 million, 12.6. We will make some incentive payments in early 2021, so that brings our savings down a little bit for 2021. That 2021 salary savings is an annual savings. And then in 2021, I already mentioned to you that we would have to, we're pledging to prepay this unfunded liability so that does not come back to employees later. So in 2021, we're confident that we're going to be able to net a $6.3 million savings. I just want to point out here that as we contemplated the budget, as we thought about the really difficult choices that we had to make, this program was key in helping us to alleviate some of the pressure that we really had around potentially having to impact field employees, layoffs. This was a really key component. It was exactly what the intention of this was, and it delivered. Next slide, please. So I did mention there are a few increases that you will see in this budget, and that is a result of really looking at overall in the city between combination of our reductions and a little bit of upward movement in our revenue. So you will find that we did put in $5 million to operate the new 48th Avenue shelter. I know you'll be talking to Host, I think, next week, who can talk to you a little bit more about that particular project. In addition, our colleagues in Host, we added another $1.5 million in homeless outreach resources to add to the existing budget that they already have for those purposes. In 2021, you will see that we have $3.4 million for the first full year of operation of the Solution Center. That is with DDPHE, and so tomorrow I believe they are coming, and hopefully we can talk to you a little bit about that. We did add about $2.5 million to the Social Impact Bond Program to continue to support housing outcomes for that population. Brendan mentioned the activation of mills for human services, and that equates to about $3 million, and those dollars will be focused on additional property tax relief, some TANF cash support, as well as additional eviction assistance. Our colleagues in human services will be administering those three programs and can talk to you more about in detail about how those dollars will be directed. You will also see $1 million for the STAR Alternative Response Program. I think Brendan mentioned yesterday, but it's worth mentioning again that we recognize that it's currently a pilot, and we will work with that organization to make sure to see if we could build that out. And we have had some preliminary conversations with Caring for Denver, potential of actually matching those dollars as we begin to explore options to really broaden that impact. We are receiving some additional acres in parkland, and so we needed to, of course, add some additional dollars to make sure we could maintain that parkland. And we wanted to make sure that we are ready for next year opening our rec centers. And so there's some deep cleaning that needs to occur for the safety of all of our patrons, and we invested additional dollars for cleaning at the rec centers. The mayor yesterday talked a lot about some of the challenges that we're facing around youth violence in our city. And so you will see when our Office of Children's Affairs comes to talk to you, we have added additional dollars to their budget to help to distribute into the community to help support the outcomes around the task force that has been working around that. We've also added another $300,000 to the Immigration Legal Defense Fund, bringing that totality of that program to $500,000. This $3.5 million is on top of the $3.5 that we have in the budget to help support the convention center as we monitor the potential COVID closure as part of 2021. You saw that we had some savings on the technology side. We also have some mandatory increases and some obligations that we have through different maintenance agreements. And so we added additional dollars to assure that we can meet those legal obligations. There's another $1.4 million to meet some of the insurance premium increases that we're required to meet. And then I think I probably talked about the 7.9 quite a bit, so you're probably very familiar with that. Go to the next slide, Zach. I'm going to turn it back over to Brendan to talk a little bit about federal funding and the role that it plays in 2020, and then I will be back for questions.
Thanks, Stephanie. So while we had all of you today, and because we often get questions about what is the role of federal funding in responding to our emergency, how does it support or not support our budget, we wanted to just provide brief overview of where the federal funding and emergency funding plans stand at this point. We did receive coronavirus relief funds by way of the Federal Treasury Department of $127 million. We've also received an award to date of $35 million from FEMA, and we have set aside $27 million in this is our cities program. So these aren't federal funds of $27 million in that special revenue from general fund contingency as well as the Tabor Reserve Fund. Next slide. So FEMA, of the two federal funding sources, FEMA is the most challenging or robust in terms of how do we have to actively manage it. We had an initial submission, so a project worksheet was submitted. Sorry, I'm getting into the technical FEMA terms here, that the city sent in to access FEMA dollars earlier this year. We were awarded $35.4 million, and then we received cash from FEMA. So they award you the 35.4, but the cash that actually comes to the city is $17.7 million. And that was based off of also the fact that we would have to provide a cash match for the award as part of our commitment to FEMA. Next slide. But FEMA is a process, and it is not something that we just submit one worksheet for. We have to submit multiple worksheets, and one was submitted on July 24th, and a new project worksheet was submitted on the 14th, so this past Monday, for additional costs for shelter as well as for testing, and we have to go through a review and approval process with FEMA. And until FEMA actually awards the dollars and then sends us that cash, we have to wait to see if those project worksheets, those submissions, are going to be approved. Next slide. So where does the coronavirus relief fund dollars? So this is the 127. We have presented on two phases being rolled out. Phases 1, 20 million, and I won't go into all the uses because we presented this at previous meetings. I want to be respectful of time. And phase 2 at 26 and change million dollars. We've also set aside 25 million in city operation reimbursements and costs incurred to respond to the emergency. This is not to be confused with the dollars that would otherwise be going towards closing our budget gap in that reimbursement process. We're still working on that increment that I showed you in the Schedule 100 earlier. And then we've set aside a reserve, and in addition to that, a FEMA cost share reserve. And let me talk about what that means. So this, what I've described in the past is a reserve in the event of resurgence, if we have to have additional funds available to us to deal with the resurgence. Next slide. So we are going through that FEMA application process, but like we said, it is now mid-September. That last worksheet just went in. We have to go through, I believe it's a 90-day process. FEMA has 90 days to get back to us to tell us whether or not our costs are going to be considered. But you can imagine we are advancing dollars as well at the same time under the assumption that we're going to be reimbursed for them. So what we have to do is also balance our available CARES funds against the unknown proposition of the FEMA award as we navigate through the balance of the year. So this slide kind of describes that balance, but let's just spend a second on the right-hand side of this slide. If FEMA does not fund or shelter or testing costs, or if FEMA does not make a determination, so if they don't get back to us, or if they ask for more information and they're taking longer and longer, we might need to use a portion of those CARES funds as a reserve to address those costs. Because remember, the CARES dollars, they expire at the end of December. So we have this kind of challenging timing situation where we're being responsive to the emergency conditions that we have in front of us, both in testing and with our shelter needs. And we're trying to pursue FEMA as much as we possibly can. But at the same time, we know that we have expiring CARES funds, and they are the safety net when we don't know if FEMA is going to transact those dollars. So it's an interesting balance, but we just want to acknowledge that balance as we move through the balance of this year. With that, that concludes my federal funding update, and I'm going to turn it over to Laura Perry to talk about our capital improvement program.
Great, thank you, Brendan. Good morning. My name is Laura Perry, and I serve as the Capital Planning and Programming Director in the Department of Finance. But before providing the financial overview today of the 2021 Capital Improvement Program, I first wanted to thank and recognize Emily Snyder, our Capital Budget Manager, and the Capital Planning and Programming team for all of their hard work this summer in delivering the 2021 Capital Improvement Program budget. As the city faces financial challenges and uncertainty because of the public health pandemic, the Capital Improvement Program remains financially stable at a time when many public institutions across the nation have canceled projects due to reduced revenue. With Denver's dedicated and financially stable revenue sources supporting our capital investments, Denver is very well positioned to support our economic recovery as capital project investments serve as a strong economic foundation. The 2021 capital budget sustains the work we have programmed while balancing constraints in our operating budget. The city is very fortunate to have 5 annual revenue sources which support the delivery of our capital improvement projects. These revenues are separate and distinct from the operating budget revenues you heard about in the earlier slides. So focusing on this slide and moving clockwise, starting with the Entertainment and Cultural Capital Facilities Fund in purple, this fund is often referred to as our seat tax fund. This is a 10% seat tax from ticket sales charged on shows at our performing venues. So Red Rocks concerts, shows at the Buell Theater, etc. These revenues are dedicated to capital maintenance and improvements at our performing venues. So they're generated at the venues and then reinvested right back into them. The next slice of the pie, the green, is the Parks, Trails, and Open Space Fund. This is a dedicated sales tax that was approved by voters 2 years ago to benefit parks, trails, and open space improvements across the city. These funds are programmed via a 5-year plan that was approved by City Council a couple of years ago. Next, in red, is our Winter Park Trust Fund. These funds are generated from our Winter Park Resort up in the mountains, from ski activity, mountain biking, etc. And these are restricted to the repair and rehabilitation of parks and recreation facilities across the city. The city receives a blanket $2 million amount annually, as well as an incentive payment that's received by September 30th each year based on performance at the resort. And then second to last, our State Conservation Trust Fund. These are our lottery dollars. So every time you buy a lottery ticket, you are reinvesting those dollars to the city to maintain parks assets across the city. These are dedicated to parks per state statute and are used primarily on capital maintenance for all of our parks and recreation facilities. And then last but not least is our Capital Improvement Fund. This is 75% of our capital improvement program. The revenues which comprise this fund are primarily property tax, which is 50% of the capital program, thereby ensuring that we have a stable source to support capital maintenance. Within the property tax allocation is 2.5 mils that's dedicated to property tax to capital maintenance for our facilities. That was voted on by voters in 2007. And in total, our property tax for 2021 is $52 million for the 2.5 mils in total. We also receive dollars from the state for the Highway Users Trust Fund for transportation investments, real estate sales, as well as investment earnings also generate dollars for this particular fund. Next slide, please. So looking a bit about our historical revenue performance over time, you will note that since the end of the Great Recession, the annual capital improvement program has experienced significant growth based on Denver's healthy economy, as well as a transfer from the general fund that Stephanie referenced earlier. So you see the transfers that we've received for one-time capital projects really began in 2014 and since have grown. And beginning this year and next, we will not be receiving a general fund transfer. In total, the 2020 revised forecast includes a $25 million shortfall from the original projections, primarily because of the COVID-19 pandemic, attributed to reductions in seat tax because of mass gathering restrictions, as well as an elimination of the planned $14.5 million general transfer that Stephanie referenced earlier. In total, this is a 13% decline in expected revenues this year. However, despite decreases in revenue, the 2020 budget remains stable because of reserve built during previous years, as well as proactive financial planning. And again, property tax comprises 50% of our program, and that has continued to be a stable revenue source, as shown on this slide in blue, to support our capital improvements, particularly capital maintenance. Turning to 2021, our revenue projections continue to show a constrained financial position compared to previous years due to COVID, and revenues are flat compared to our revised position in 2020. There is, again, no general transfer for capital projects budget for the first time since 2014 in 2021. And then last, I just wanted to quickly comment on the Parks, Trails, and Open Space Fund. For 2020, the capital investment has been maintained at $19.8 million. And for 2021, we have budgeted an $18.7 million capital investment to continue to make progress on implementing the 5-year plan approved by council. And you'll hear more from Parks and Recreation during their presentation next week. Next slide, please. I quickly wanted to focus around how we address the $25 billion revenue shortfall in the capital budget this year. So there were really 3 actions that we took. The first is having departments review capital project budgets and their associated schedules. We were able to close out the budgets of completed projects to the tune of $10.7 million. And that added to our reserve to help us close that $25 million gap without major impacts to projects this year. We also moved program management expenses to the Elevate Denver bond. So as part of the general fund transfer, we had $3.75 million programmed as part of that has now been cost shifted over to the Elevate Denver bond program, which helped provide, obviously, an offset to the reduction in the transfer this year. And then last but not least is our fund balance reserve. So every year in CIP, we hold a contingency for unforeseen revenue volatility or project needs. That contingency is required to be appropriated by City Council. And we luckily this year did not have any unforeseen events other than COVID and had that available to help us address the revenue shortfall. In addition to about $3.7 million in revenue overperformance across our sources last year, which all combined helped us address the $25 billion shortfall in the budget. Next slide. Focusing on 2021, so this pie chart, it looks like it off a little bit in the PDF, shows the program sources delineated by the percentage that they comprise the 2021 budget. So in total, we have $484 million across all sources, and that's the annual funds that I walked you through earlier, as well as the grant and bond funds that are expected to be expended in 2021 to progress projects. And of this $484 million, $156 million is appropriated within our annual CIP revenue sources. And then going back to my comment about how reserves have really helped us this year, we have included and held $7.4 million in contingency next year to help weather and offset any future revenue volatility to ensure that we can maintain our investments in capital. Next slide. For the 2021 capital planning process, there were 5 strategies that were utilized to help guide the financial planning for the budget. The first is preserving our financial sustainability through healthy reserves. So I mentioned, similar to the general fund, we're holding a contingency of $7.4 million to offset any future volatility. And we are also looking and have partnered with the operating budget and budget management office to evaluate general fund savings measures. So there are several cost shifts included in the 2021 budget for eligible costs that were programmed in the general fund that will be shifting over to CIP and the Elevate Denver Bond Program, and I'll cover that in a couple of slides. The last four quickly are, supporting a sustainable economic recovery. This is very important as capital provides a multiplier effect for the economy in terms of providing jobs and other opportunities to small business, delivering a more equitable city by prioritizing investments in historically marginalized communities, continuing to invest in maintenance of our assets, and of course, advancing our commitments to transportation and mobility, and continuing to build out that network and protect our parks and open spaces through our dedicated sources. Next slide, please. So this is a couple of pie charts that show the breakdown of the expenditures in the 2021 CIP program. So I'm going to start with the pie chart on the left. So 47% of our capital program is maintenance in the 2021 budget, and that totals about $76 million of the 156 I referenced earlier. Infrastructure is essential to everyday life in the city, and we are committed to maintaining our assets. We received significant feedback during the Elevate Denver Bond Program process that maintenance is important, and we've continued to uphold this investment. Within this, we have been very diligent on understanding our deferred maintenance needs, because that has also been a big part of the conversation in the past, as well as life cycle sustainment, and that's keeping up with our asset maintenance so that they don't fall in the deferred maintenance category. Within that 47% maintenance allocation, it's an even split between investments in keeping up with our maintenance on our assets, as well as catching up on deferred maintenance. And the blue represents our remaining funding, which is financial obligations. These are any certificate of participation payments, any contractual obligations that we have for intergovernmental agreements. These are about 31% of the program. 18% of the program. And then last but not least are our expansion investments in the green, and that's 51 million. Within this, we also have about 9.3 million for local match commitments, which leverages over 63 million in external funding to address capital needs across the city. So now the pie chart shown on, I believe I said the right, I started with the right-hand pie chart. The left-hand pie chart, this shows the asset categories and the expenditures within each. So 51% of our investments in the capital improvement program are for transportation assets, with parks and recreation following at 22%, city buildings at 15%, and our arts and cultural facilities at 8%. Next slide. This pie chart shows the composition of our capital program appropriations by department. The majority and lion's share of our capital investments go to the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure at 80%. That is due to the magnitude of our transportation investments and associated maintenance of those investments. Next slide. The 2021 Capital Improvement Program budget includes capital projects that embody the vision set forth in Denver Right. They resolve critical life, safety, and maintenance needs of the city that really result in the forward progress of the Mobility Action Plan and launch new opportunities for parks, trails, and open space. There's 4 key capital investments on the slide I'd like to highlight specifically. The first is mobility.
I think we're going to pause for a quick second. I think we lost the slideshow. I know Zach is working on his end. He's saying that, yep, he's working on getting it back up. So we'll go ahead and take a quick pause here because I know the slide, Laura, has a lot of information on it. And I'm just grateful that we actually got through your slide deck piece, because I know the last couple of times we've had to rush through when we got to CIP, and our capital improvement program within the city is so important and is the upkeep of all of our assets. And so we want to make sure that we're able to show the 2021 CIP project highlights up here on the screen. And then just a time check for folks. We're almost at the end of the slide deck, and we've got council members up in the queue, and so we should have a good hour for questions. All right, there you go, Laura.
Great, thank you, Zach. So quickly, there are 4 projects I want to highlight here. You will hear more from departments over the course of the next couple of weeks on specific projects. But first, transportation and mobility. So because our capital improvement program and investments are stable, we are able to continue to make progress on our transportation and mobility projects. So in the annual CIP budget, we have $70.2 million programmed, with an additional $95 million planned in an upcoming Elevate Denver bond issuance in the 4th quarter of this year. So we will be coming to City Council here in the next couple of months to request that 4th issuance. And with both the bond and the CIP investments combined, we're looking at a total investment of $165 million in transportation and mobility for next year. Next, on Parks and Recreation, Heron Pond. This is a critical water quality and regional park investment. It's currently been moving forward through several phases. This is the next phase of this project, and it's programmed to the tune of $6.2 million in the 2021 budget. We really this year focused on ensuring that we continue to invest in any multi-year commitments for funding to make sure that we can bring our projects to the finish line, and this is one of those. Moving down facilities quickly, I wanted to call out 2 here. The first are building security improvements. So this is $800,000 programmed for the first phase of security improvements to the web building. These have been under design over the last year, and these are implementation dollars. And then the last one is ADA improvements. So in total, in the budget, we have $5 million programmed, with $2 million from the operating budget and $3 million from the capital budget to support implementation of ADA improvements across the city. Next slide. As Kim referenced earlier this year, we closely collaborated with the Office of Social Equity and Innovation to define and integrate the budget equity framework into the various levels of decision-making into the capital improvement program to ensure that equitable infrastructure outcomes are achieved across the city. This map is a visual representation of Plan 2021 CIP projects and how they align with access to opportunity. Each department applies their own equity approach to inform their capital priorities for the assets in which they're responsible for constructing and maintaining. And you'll hear more from the Department of Transportation Infrastructure and Parks in their presentation over the next couple of weeks as to how they respectively applied an equity lens into the allocation and scoping of their capital program budgets. Next slide. This slide represents the total amount that we are looking to charge to the capital improvement program and the Elevate Denver bond program. During the Great Recession, I had the privilege of working on the Better Denver bond program, and one of the lessons we learned firsthand from that program is that capital projects can be used to preserve jobs, even within our own city. And we are mirroring the financial actions undertaken with the Great Recession with the Better Denver Bond program, with the proposal here in front of you in the budget for 2021. Beginning this year, about 133 city staff will begin tracking and charging their salaries to CIP and Elevate Denver Bond program for discrete project and program management efforts. These costs are legally allowable and will be diligently tracked to ensure that the time that is being expended is appropriately accounted for on these particular programs. The planned charging of the staff time to CIP and Elevate Denver Bond program will not impact programmed projects. And this is due to programmed reserves within the bond program that have been proactively held to respond to economic, market, and project conditions. And as you can see on this slide, this effort will result in 1.6 million savings from the general fund in 2020 and about 6.5 million in savings for 2021. We have also worked with arts and venues and DDO to make sure that we can also provide benefit to them as well. And so the eligible arts and venues folks on the public art team to their special revenue fund, as well as the workforce team working on projects within DDO. Next slide, Zach.
I think we're having a few internet stability issues here. So I think you're back now, Laura, or maybe it was on my side. Go ahead.
Okay, next slide, Zach. Okay, this slide demonstrates respectively the amounts that will be allocated from the previous slide that you saw with the breakdown of all departments to the Capital Improvement Fund and the Elevate Denver Bond Program specifically. So in the 2021 budget for CIP, we've included $2.75 million for the charging of salaries for city project managers and staff supporting the delivery of CIP projects. And then within the bond program, we will be allocating $6.3 million for 2020 and 2021 for the charging of salaries of staff who are supporting the implementation of the bond program. In addition to staff, we will also be cost shifting project and program management professional services that have been supported by the general fund to CIP and Elevate Denver Bond to continue to ensure that we can support the implementation of our projects. And this was the $3.75 million that I referenced earlier from the general fund transfer that CIP had been accustomed to receiving. So within CIP specifically, we've programmed $2.45 million for professional services for project and program management from Parks, DOTI, and DOF. So the reductions were taken in the operating budget and the costs were shifted over to capital. And then the Elevate Bond Program, we have $3.75 million, which was the program management for Elevate programmed for this year and next. Next slide, please, Zach. And I believe this is our final slide today to end on some silver linings. So capital investment is crucial for recovery. We are very fortunate in Denver that we have 5 dedicated revenue sources for capital projects, which has really positioned us well to sustain our investment and support a robust recovery for our economy tomorrow, as well as in the long term. We know that capital projects have a strong workforce impact. We've seen that with our own workforce program through our Denver Careers Construction Pilot. So bringing people into the pipeline by getting them new skills will position us well to ensure that as we come out of the current pandemic, when construction increases across the state, across the nation, that we have a strong labor force ready to step in and work on those projects. So you heard previously that capital investments really double in return. Every $1 million spent on a capital project generates about $2 million in economic output. And every $1 million spent also results of the provision of almost 13 jobs. In 2021, we will begin the accelerated delivery of our capital projects, which will include the $170 million planned issuance that we bring forward to City Council here over the course of the next couple of months. Coupled with the Elevate Denver Bond issuance, with our 2021 CIP, and beyond, we are projecting that will result in an investment of an additional $478 million in capital program delivery through 2023. This effort will minimize schedule delay, focus on delivering our voter commitments, and advance other high impact projects in our Elevate Denver Bond program and within our capital improvement program. And again, to reiterate, these will provide opportunities for job training and to ensure people can build careers in skilled trades, and as well as provide opportunities for a small business. And on a final note, I did want to share that after a brief pause due to COVID-19, we will be moving forward with our participatory budgeting process for the $1.7 million in capital investments shared with you earlier this year. This new schedule will actually allow us to more closely align with the city's annual budgeting process and provides more time to implement the program and engage with communities in a safe manner that still complies with public health protocols. We intend to create an adaptable approach to the participatory budgeting process to navigate any circumstances that we may encounter in 2021. And we'll be in touch with you all further and look forward to partnering with you next year as we build out this program.
Well, thank you very much, Laura, and thank you to my colleagues at Patience. This was a very comprehensive slide deck, and the participatory budgeting piece, I want to congratulate Councilwoman Kinich as well, because she has been a long time champion of participatory budgeting as well, and so glad that we are getting that going. And so we'll go right into questions now, and thank you to the presenters and for your intentionality around the slide deck. And this is great for the public as well to see what went into the decisions. And so we've got Councilwoman Black up first.
Thank you, Madam President, and thanks Laura, Brendan, and Stephanie for the excellent presentation and for all of the work I know you've all spent on this. I have a long list of questions, but I'll just ask a few now, and if there's time, come back to them. In the recession, we saw construction prices going down, so I know the city and Denver Public Schools were able to get a lot more for their money. Have you seen any economic outlook that shows that that might happen again?
I'm gonna try to play traffic cop here a little bit and farm this out with folks who are on my team. So Laura, can you take that?
So we are continuing to monitor the economics of the construction industry and the impacts from that. We are potentially forecasting a possible reduction in pricing down the road, but currently to date, we're only beginning to see a softening of that right now, but certainly another silver lining that we're crossing our fingers for.
Mm-hmm. All right, and then I have a lot of questions about property tax, and I'll just ask a couple and then I'll defer to other council members. But
Councilwoman Black,
yeah.
Black, can I just chime in on that, because I appreciate Laura's point, but you might recall also during the Great Recession you had a phenomenal softening in the private sector. In fact, it almost came to a complete halt. That's not what we're not seeing that here in this. The private sector continued to be pretty robust. In fact, I think when you see CPD, Laura will tell you that though we are not having as many projects, the value of those projects is still pretty large. And so we're not seeing, it's not apples and oranges to the Great Recession. I just wanted to share that with you. Not yet anyway.
Well, that sort of segues me into one of my other questions about commercial property values. So a lot of economists are saying that commercial properties like office buildings are going to have less of a demand and possibly the prices going down. So I don't know, we're not doing the assessments again till 2021, but that is, I don't know, something to think about, which I'm sure you are, but something concerning. But for our property taxes for 2020, what percentage were paid? Were there a lot of people who weren't able to pay their property taxes in 2020?
Councilwoman, we traditionally estimate a 2% delinquency rate on all property tax collections. And
that was pretty consistent even for this year?
I believe so. That's the last that I heard. So that means that 98% of taxpayers pay their property tax bills. That is the last I heard from Keith Berkmeyer and Steve Ellington in Treasury.
Okay. And then you have for 2021, 163 million from property taxes, which is more than 2020. Is that because of those expiring tax increment areas?
Councilwoman, that would be primarily due to the credited mills. If you're looking specifically in the general fund property tax table,
okay.
It would be primarily due to that.
Okay. And you can, as the director of finance, unilaterally make that decision. It doesn't require any council action or anything.
So the mills are adopted in December of each year by City Council. What we try to do is disclose and talk about how, if we choose to leverage that opportunity as part of the budget, so that way it could be built into those mills that are approved by council in December.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilwoman, and we'll come back to you if we get through the queue. Councilwoman Ortega.
Thank you, Madam President. I've got several questions. I'm going to just go through all of them. I'm not expecting them all to be answered now, but I just want to make sure they're all on the record. So the first one is, obviously we haven't had time to really dive into this because we just got the books yesterday, but Brendan, does this 2021 budget anticipate any user fee increases, whether it's golf, wastewater courts, whatever? Does this anticipate any fee increases? And if so, what agencies are we looking at? So that's one. And if you can get that back to us, that would be great.
So,
bond projects, I think we all need an update on what's been completed. Were they on budget? Did any of them exceed the budget? Because I want to make sure we've got enough money to complete those that have not yet been completed. How many are in process? Obviously, we heard about the next tranche of funding that we need to do the final. Sorry, that's my trash pickup going through my alley. And then on the PBI office, we need to see what the deliverables were for the 3.121 that was spent in both 19 and 20. I see there's been a significant reduction to $305,000, 895. So we just need to understand where that's at, what we're expecting from that office, or is it going to continue to even exist given sort of the delay in where we're at with National Western. Let's see. On the DERP piece, can you just share with us what percentage of that was captured by the wave of people that took advantage of the early retirement that was offered this year? So if that could be shared with us, that would be helpful. Looking at the information on, I appreciate where the increases are because I think they're really focused on addressing safety nets that are critical during this time for so many people who need them. So let me just skip that one. On the Elevate bonds, I just talked about that. I think we just want to understand how the dollars that are anticipated to get folded in to cover some of the admin costs, how that's spread across the projects. Because for those that are already completed, obviously where we didn't roll that in, it's going to be absorbed by everybody else coming after that. So we just need to know what that impact is. And part of the reason in wanting to look at the big picture is to make sure that we're not exceeding the budget of what the voters approved. And part of that is, even if we're augmenting them with general fund dollars, you know, we need to understand where those projects are. And then very last, on the CIP stuff, as you all know, one of the commitments that's been made is to have the bridges over the South Platte River that connect Washington Street to National Western, given that the new entrance is going to be off of the Washington Street side on the western edge of the property until all the triangle stuff gets done. And so those connections are going to be really critical. And I haven't seen anywhere that we've got any funding to do the Washington Street, not the Washington Street bridges, but the bridges over the river that connect Washington to National Western. We approved the funding for the artist that's going to do the work on the bridges, but we don't have the bridges funded. So it's sort of backwards. So anyway, those are my issues. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to just run through them. And look forward to getting answers to those questions. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Councilwoman Ortega. Go ahead, Brendan. And we're doing okay as far as time. We've got until noon, and then we have the afternoon. Hopefully, some folks have blocked out your afternoon to delve into the budget book a little bit more. That's why we purposely didn't schedule anything this afternoon. But go ahead, Brendan.
Sure. I just wanted to state that we're committed to taking a list of all these questions and getting them back to all council members in writing after this meeting as you all review the budget document. So I just want to make sure you all understood that it wasn't just going to be a response to Councilwoman Ortega. Any questions that we get that we don't answer at this forum, we'll get back in writing to all of you.
Much appreciated. Thank you. That's very helpful. Up next, Councilman Flynn.
Thank you, Madam President. And again, my questions are all pretty high level, given that this is an overview and I don't need long answers, but if you can answer briefly here, I'll be as brief as I can in the questions. Brendan, on slide 11, I was surprised by the observation that we were in recession already in February. And I know I read the New York Times piece on it, and I'm a little concerned because the nation and the city, we hadn't really shut down our economy yet in February to see that immediate impact. That makes me worry that there's some other fundamental in the nation's economy or the Colorado economy that also contributed to it. So do you see, or does your team see anything else at work in addition to COVID impact that could undermine this recovery, some other fundamental in the economy?
Councilman, and I think the reason that you saw February get cited, it's a mid-quarter month. So usually recessions are measured in quarterly statistics. But what I think you saw was the beginning of changes of behavior in anticipation of COVID, because the first cases were getting reported at that early point in time, and I think people were beginning to change their behavior. I have not seen anything outside of what we've talked about in the slide deck that would give me pause. But to be honest with you, things are so uncertain at this point in time that it's something that we're going to have to keep our eye on across all of these statistics.
Thank you, because folks talk a lot about a new normal as we come out of this, that there may be less need to work in the downtown office, in the downtown skyscrapers, for instance, people working from home. So there may be a shift that we see coming out of it. For the mayor, could you, and to follow on that, how close are we, given our metrics right now, how close are we to reopening more and more businesses gradually that could have an impact on this, on these forecasts in 2021? What are we seeing today? I know we get the daily update, but what do you see coming long term as far as when we can have more gatherings, larger gatherings, or more businesses open?
No consideration right now, to be honest with you, Councilman Flynn. That consideration is now at the state level. As you know, the process is we get requests for reconsideration or for variance, and we pass, once we've done our due diligence, we pass on what we believe will work to the state for further review. But in my conversations with the governor, how we might look at larger gatherings, I'll tell you there's a great deal of concern, because I'll remind everyone we're also now entering to where the season where we have the flu virus that will be a part of our community as well. And so there's a lot of concern right now that we would pull the trigger, broaden participation on gatherings, and then all of a sudden we've got a dual pandemic going on in our community. So there's a lot of apprehension right now to revisit or to allow for larger gatherings at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. So we don't see a more rapid reopening. We see more.
I don't think so. I think what you'll see is things like Broncos, where it took a lot of time to, outdoor facility, kind of incrementally increase that.
Right.
But in terms of indoor larger gatherings, it's going to be a very slow, methodical, cautious process.
It was very strange to watch the Bronco game and not hear the incomplete and all those.
Absolutely.
For Stephanie, slide 52, the special incentive program, I thought our goal was to have more enrollment than what we got. But leaving that aside, can the backfilling, I think it was 65 positions need to be backfilled, can they be done by realignment within existing staff and reapportionment of the duties of those people in place of hiring to replace those 65 people?
Councilman, you're very observant. We didn't quite reach the 40% that our goal was for general fund. We're just a little under, probably like 30 something, 38, 37%. And well, I think that the thing about the incentive program is that it's open to everyone. And so whoever does participate, right, can fully participate. So it could be the city's controller, it could be a director of an agency. So I do think that instead of thinking about it that way, people are thinking about just sort of the totality of all the vacancies, not just the ones from retirement, but also others that they have. I will say that the timing of the incentive program did force us to sort of rethink. Everyone sort of rethought their vacancies and said, so here's a great example. If a director was to resign or to retire as part of their incentive program, they may have had another vacant position that they planned on filling, but instead they swapped it out. So the 65 might be a little misrepresentative. It's those positions, but as a result, there was a cascading effect where we were still able to offset that savings elsewhere. It created a lot more flexibility for us to be able to do those things. So I would say that there probably are some places where we are realigning, but given the titles of the folks and the work that those folks did, we did have to backfill some of those. I hope that helps.
Oh, yes, it does. Thank you. And Laura, on slide 62 on the CIP, did that, the 2A parks revenue, is that the entirety of the sales tax revenues that are collected under 2A? Because it
No,
talked about a
portion. That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And I guess, Brendan, the only other observation I would make is, as you know, I always go to Schedule 100 as soon as I get the budget book, and I find it very concerning that we project a fund balance at the end of next year that is only half of what we had in 2017. So, but it is still 12%, and 15 is used to be our floor. So that's something to keep an eye on, obviously, because we need to build that back up. Thank you. That's all I have, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilman. Up next, Councilwoman Sawyer.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you guys so much for this incredible presentation. My head is spinning a little bit. Brendan, thank you for the assumptions. I really appreciate it. It gave me a lot more information. So I really am grateful that you added those slides in there. Thanks for that. So a couple of questions around the property taxes, just to kind of clarify, and I want to make sure I've got my head wrapped around this. So the property taxes have been approved by voters, but we've been kind of hanging on to them. Is that, and we haven't activated them? Is that, am I understanding that correctly? The mills are kind of sitting out there, but we just didn't activate them. So they've been approved, but we just haven't been using them up to this point.
So yes, so there is when we passed ballot measure 2A back in 2012, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. There is a provision inside of that ballot measure that allowed us to both credit as well as restore credited mills. So they were mills that were set aside to comply with Tabor limitations historically. Whenever we exceed our 6% growth rate, that is the cap that's built inside of that ballot measure, we have to reduce our mills to stay underneath that cap, that 6% plus local growth cap. What ends up happening is that we have then accumulated mills over time because our property tax valuation has been so robust that it has far exceeded the 6% cap that was provided for in that ballot. So this is taking an increment of those mills that were reduced to stay underneath that ballot provision and activating them. And the reason that we have the opportunity to activate them this year is because we are in a non-reassessment year. So local growth is new permits and new valuation coming online. We always capture that value. But in a non-reassessment year, traditionally, our value increase is zero. So then you can incrementally increase a portion of those mills to capture that revenue under the ballot provision. I'm sorry, that was a lot. I've yet to learn a way of explaining it in a more simple fashion.
No, that was actually that was great. That clarified a lot for me. So in terms of the decision to activate those, I of course understand financially why we are doing it, right? But in terms of the effect that it will have on our community, who is already potentially struggling, to put food on the table. Some of our community members are literally wondering where they're gonna how they're going to feed their families their next meal. What kind of considerations did we go through when we thought about that balance?
Councilwoman,
maybe that's a question for the mayor.
And I'll let the mayor jump in. I'll talk about the financial mechanics of it.
Okay.
The mayor should probably talk about the property tax rebate program and the increase there.
Okay.
So the thing that we did is we checked on what is the impact to the median household, because we wanted to check on what that burden would be. So for that 0.732 mils, the annual impact to the median household would be $23.
Right.
So the first thing we said, okay, that seems, comparing that to the trade-off of having, in the general fund at least, for the 0.488 mils, that trade-off of is incrementally better than cutting $9 million more in services that the taxpayers would otherwise be receiving. But then we also, and I'll turn it over to the mayor, chatted with the mayor about increasing the dollars towards the property tax rebate program at the same time, as well as changing some standards around that we've spoken with Councilwoman Gilmore and Kanish in the past about that program and trying to be loosening up who would be eligible for that program, and we're actively in those conversations.
Great.
I'm not sure much more needs to be said. I mean, that's the consideration, is the overall annual impact on a resident. No one looks to increase that burden, particularly at these very difficult times. I remember 2012 when this passed, and we had those credits in abeyance. The commitment was we would not deploy them unless we absolutely needed them. And if you might recall, the public overwhelmingly supported that initiative. But of course, things like affordable housing, that is one of those absolute things we ought to be doing. Homelessness, absolute ought to be doing. And in fact, today we're in a financial critical crisis, and we need to find a avenue forward. It makes a lot of sense, but you're talking about $14 to $23 over an entire year. So it's just over $1 a month per household, or almost maybe over $2 a month per household, depending on the value of home. So we absolutely take in consideration the burden people feel. But as we noted back in 2012, 2013, when we make that consideration, we make sure that we're taking into consideration everybody who will be impacted and what that burden might look like. In this case, it's 0.448, I think, or 0.48 is negligible in terms of the impact on families. But to Brenda's point, the overwhelming impact, had we not been able to have these tools available to deploy, would have been exponentially higher for every household.
I really appreciate that. Thank you for that thoughtful, consideration. And did I hear Brendan say that we're considering changing some of the qualifications for the rebate program?
You might recall you did last November,
right.
Last year rather. But Brendan, go ahead.
We added some funds to the refund program last year.
But are we doing it again this year?
Yeah, it was something that was a council conversation around this time in the budget process. And then we met that commitment again. And then we've also had some conversations around expanding access to the program. We went through a process with Councilwoman Kanish and Gilmore about a year and a half ago now, where we tried to we added families with children as a eligible population. But I think we have to go back and loosen some of those restrictions to gain more access to the program.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, if that's I hope that's a conversation that we consider again as we go into this fall, because I think that is absolutely something that we need to look at as we move forward to help support our community. So thanks so much for that, and thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Kanish.
Thank you, Madam President. Just to close out on the piece, I do think we probably need higher income limits for families with children. I think it's clear that they just were too low and difficult for very many people to qualify. And so in some ways it makes sense to have different income qualifications for different populations based on need. And we know DPS needs these families to stay in the city. So I do look forward to that conversation. Thank you. And I want to just, I guess, thank everybody. I had a whole whole running list in my head of some of the things I thought our budget might need to do, and every single one of them is in your proposal in terms of the mills, in terms of moving the bond project staff onto the bond side of the ledger. So thank you for a lot of assertive and creative approaches. I have a bigger picture question, and might consider it maybe an optimist question, but I don't know if we're going to see major federal relief dollars come to local governments. I don't want to give up hope on that in spite of the stall. And I guess that, we have a charter that gives council the authority to appropriate dollars and to approve spending. And we also have an ordinance for my colleagues. I'll just reference it because you may want to look at it. Section 20-52 talks about when we have to give council approval for grants. I believe the administration did a great job taking in the CARES Act dollars, and I support the way that you allocated them, but you accepted them without a council vote, and they were allocated without council votes, except where a contract exceeding $500,000 was required. We didn't treat them like budget supplementals. We didn't treat them like other revenue that comes into the city where the council votes on those things. So here's my kind of question, and it may be one like my colleagues that we want to think and talk more about afterwards, but let's imagine we approve this budget or come close to approving it, and significant federal relief dollars come into the city or something changes. I'm concerned, and I want us to have a really good open conversation about making sure that council is in the decision-making seat about where those dollars then get allocated and which pieces of the budget get restored, and that the charter powers that we have are honored and a piece of that. And I guess, I don't know how far ahead you've thought. I've had our legislative council take a look at this, and, it kind of gets into some very picayune definitions of whether the federal dollars that came in were other financial assistance or grants. And, I'm less interested in debating the past than I am understanding whether we are clear that if we approve a budget, and it's a tough budget, right, that it doesn't get rewritten by one branch of government if things change significantly, and that it is, that the intent of the charter is honored going forward. So I know it's a big question, and it may be that we all need to just sit down and talk some more about it, but I think it's an important one because I think that where we prioritize restoration of spending is a conversation the council needs to be at the table for if we're in that world. And again, I may sound ridiculously optimistic given the world we're in right now, but I'm hopeful that we do see some federal relief, So anyway, any thoughts?
Councilwoman Kanisha, if I can respond. And first of all, I thought it was magical that you were able to say all that without moving your lips. You actually froze on camera. But your question is one that is well received, and I can tell you, I don't think there's anyone from the executive or side of the sector or branches of government that disagrees with what you're saying. Only thing I would just add, and this is just for us to always remind ourselves, when we started to accept and needed to deploy, we were still very much in the midst of a state of emergency, and these dollars were flowing and people were in trouble. And we were trying to do everything we could to kind of, plug the levee, restore the levee, if you will, and try to stop this. In the perfect world, we obviously will and want to stop with, or to pause long enough and allow for the process, the appropriate process to go forward, which means being inclusive of the legislative branch, and to make sure that your voices are heard and your input is made. I think doing this in partnership will be extremely important to me going forward. I don't disregard that. But the first time around, I remember that first phase, we were flying so fast and we were trying to do everything we can, and we tried to be as transparent with you all as possible. We got the money, we got it deployed, and rightfully so. You raised concerns. What about our thoughts? Well, right now, people just need to get support. Let us get that out, and then let us figure this out going forward. And I think we have a process now where I think we have a little better idea of what's going on and how we're moving and how to respond. And this was just so unprecedented, not only for Denver, but the entire country. So it's not unusual. I saw a lot of this around the country, and I hear you. I heard you then, and I agree with you.
All right, I don't have any other questions, and Brendan, maybe we can follow up afterwards on the mechanisms and the legal process for some of that.
Sure.
Thanks.
And just so you know, I think some of it is also informed by the structure that the federal government might provide us. That has been one of the challenges, even with the CARES funds, is a lack of guidance and continued revisions to the guidance when we receive it. So happy to sit down with you on that.
Thank you, Councilwoman, for that question. And I think that is very relevant, especially if we are in that place to restore some of our budgets, and how do we prioritize that based on the needs of our communities and the city as well. So thank you for that, and look forward to the conversation outlining that process. Councilman Hines, you're up.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you, Councilmember Kanich, for your comments. I totally share them. I'm committed to ensuring we have 3 functioning branches of government. I'm committed to transparency. I believe the people of Denver deserve it and demand it, and in any world, perfect or not. So I'm going to do my best to be transparent as well. And most of the, this is an intro, and then we'll have other follow-ups. So I just want to, throw out a couple of things that I've flagged already. So I also want to compliment the mayor. I want to thank you for your comment yesterday, bifurcating our civil rights resurgence that we have in 2020 versus our obligation to keep people safe in our city. So I recognize that that's a very difficult challenge, and I think you were quoted in Denver Right last night about homelessness, saying, I want people to pause and realize this is to use euphemism, not that you used, but this is a tough nut to crack. And I agree with you. I don't agree with you on everything, but I totally agree with you that homelessness is a huge challenge. So is crime related to homelessness and crime on its own. So I thank you for making the distinction between our civil rights movement and keeping our public safe. I also want to thank Councilmember Flynn for the comment about COVID and how it might transform workers, or how they commute to the office, or not commute at all. I've heard from several businesses and residents in the urban core that they're concerned about homelessness and crime, as I say, and the increase in crime that's documented around homeless encampments. This is maybe a question for Director Hanlon. Do you have in any of the financial models, or are you considering impacts on our revenue should businesses or residents exit the urban core?
Thank you for the question. What we've done for our financial modeling is really focused on the COVID impact, and specifically the public health measures that need to be taken. I've received a few questions about, well, what are the assumptions inside of the third and fourth quarter? And that is kind of a status quo with where we're at, which is kind of a partial opening, but restrictions on gatherings. But it is something that that's why we added that slide, that small business slide of openings, to our slide deck. It's really important that we understand that if that is just a trend that is temporary, or might some of those businesses remain closed for a prolonged period of time, and if they're being replaced. So the beauty of that metric is that it can be used to both measure closures for right now, whether they're permanent or temporary, we're not too sure. But we also would be able to then see if there are businesses backfilling vacated spaces. And I think the longer that those numbers remain low, the more I would be, and I think all of us should be concerned about them staying low, and what do we need to do to direct support to our small business community. So an excellent question.
Great. So I'm also, I don't know if this needs to be covered now, but it was mentioned in this presentation. Maybe it would be, you're happy. I'm fine if you defer it to the Dottie presentation, but I noticed, I'm very interested in ensuring we have a robust approach to our CIP transportation improvements. And of course that means cars, but it also means non-cars too. And so we've committed to $165 million to transportation and mobility. That's 3 million, and including 3 million for sidewalks, 5 million for bikes. That's 4.8% of the total. And so that is one of my flags, and so I just will be looking at that more. You're welcome to comment now, or again defer to Dottie. The other thing that I would say is I'm also very interested in the budget discussion for the legislative branch. So I look forward to that at some point in the future. And that's all I have, Madam President. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Brendan, did you want to chime in?
We, I believe, have Dottie tomorrow morning. So I will put that question on Ulyss's list of things to review tomorrow. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Cashman.
Thank you, Madam President. Brendan, I'll echo the thanks for a great in-depth presentation as always happens, and rightfully so. Over the next weeks and next month or two, we'll wrestle a bit with these numbers, but I honestly can't even imagine the depth of the work you and Stephanie and your staff go through to make this work any year, no less than one so challenging. So I just have one brief question. I'm wondering if in the budget book or elsewhere, there's like a one-page version of where all of our Caring for Denver dollars end up.
Councilman, I don't believe that we have that particular page called up, but let me meet with my team and we'll get you a crosswalk on that.
Yeah, it would certainly, because the number is approaching what, $35 to $40 million, and would just love to see a comprehensive breakdown of those dollars.
Got it. That is the total amount that sales tax rate produces. Denver and in the city budget, that would just be a portion of it, most likely identified in either grants and other areas, but we'll get you that list.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Torres.
Thanks, Madam President. Just a couple of really quick questions. I think I just found the answer to my first one, which was the amount of savings based on furloughs for 2021. And is it 12 million?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you, Brendan. My next question, and let me thank the team and Mayor for taking that approach. I think that one is one that really makes sense for the year in scaling it on an equitable level. So thank you for doing that. My next question is for Kim and Tatiana.
I think you can go ahead, Councilwoman. We've got them already up in the queue, so go ahead.
Okay, great. So just really wanting to get kind of the perspective from your level of work when it came to the distribution of CARES dollars, one question, but then also kind of your footprint when it comes to not your footprint, but your impression, I think, of how departments have been evolving with your office, with the training that they've been receiving, with identifying and really taking part in really realizing what equity looks like at a service delivery level. And the third question for you, Kim, if we're seeing cuts and increases, should we assume that you have had an eye on where those have taken place and that it has, for any given department, even some of the independent agencies, kind of passed muster? Or are there things that you and your office really focused in more heavily when it came to what we're seeing and the questions that you might have asked departments to grapple with? Just remembering last year that departments, it was a bit of a learning curve to get to, community benefit and burden discussion when it came to expansion. So when it comes to cuts and even expansion still, were there things that have shifted as you were working with departments?
Yeah, great question. I want to defer your first question around care dollars to Brendan, as I think that can be adequately followed up in the prior question. So Brendan, I'll put that in your head in terms of our involvement in that. I think it's more a comprehensive conversation. Your second question, most certainly I would say this year we were more refined with also providing training to our agencies. And so not only did they utilize budget equity process, the tools that we gave them, but they're also training that gave them context behind the why. So we saw a lot of rigor this year in our sessions and partnering with agencies around just common language. So I think last year mitigation was really a hard word to unpack for folks. And then you put into the context mitigation around impact to a certain neighborhood or a certain demographic. So this year, I would say really were more meticulous with that and refine the language. And again, shout out to Brendan for making sure that that was one thing that we were very clear about. This budget, there are very tough decisions. And so our office, there are some decisions that you have to make a decision. And so we tried to make sure that people were prepared to mitigate that decision. We had a lot of connection points. I know Tariana mentioned that our office, as a result of mitigations, we partnered agencies. So like Parks and Rec, there were Parks and Rec, there were Public Library, Children Affairs. We were making decisions around our park and recreation center hours and our rec center hours. We came together, our office helped facilitate a collective conversation. So when we're looking at equitable outcomes, we look at the neighborhoods that we're making those decisions in. And so that was a result of, I would say, the stronger part of our office connections that we brought folks together to say, let's not make our decisions in a silo. The budget is a very interconnected web. And so you make one decision here, but it's also connected to another area there. And so our office wanted to make sure that we were comprehensive with the ecology of the budget so that way we're not making or giving feedback around siloed decisions that may have a detrimental impact somewhere else. So I would say those were like, we were the glue between that, where it's not simplistic. Sometimes you may say, cut the whole budget, but if you don't think about how that's impacting over this area, mitigation became a glue to say, you can't just throw out one part without saying Children Affairs also works with our police department, and they also partner with our library. And so we said that look at the ecology of our workers, we're all providing vital social safety net services to folks, and it lives in multiple places. And so our office became a part of that conversation to make sure that they were comprehensive in their approach and gave feedback to all departments, to your question around our role in that. So definitely tough decisions, but we were definitely front and center, making sure we were clear about mitigations and the connectedness of those decisions.
Thank you so much. And I think it might come up in questioning on some of the department pieces, because I can only imagine both identifying harm with change, but also noticing duplication maybe in work, and I'll just be kind of identifying and keeping an eye on when both of those might be taking place. So I appreciate your work, Kim. Thank you.
We were also as well, we wanted to be fiscally responsible. And so we did, if we call some of those items, we would bring those folks together to say, how are you offering translation versus here? So we did have those comprehensive, and the good thing about our partnership with BMO, if we noticed any large structural impacts, we literally had a check-in every hour of the day, it felt like, with BMO to say, hey, there may be some duplication, let's look at those things, but it's not perfect. So to your question, look forward to your feedback as you're reviewing those presentations, selected agencies.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I'm not seeing anybody else up in the queue, and I do have a couple questions myself, and so I'll go ahead and pose those now. And this is probably a question for you, Brendan. I went, after looking at the City Council budget, then went directly to grants in the budget book, and looking at how we rely on federal, state grants to accomplish some of our most important services, especially around youth programming, mitigating maybe gang involvement, some of those direct services, especially around STAR. And I know we have the Caring for Denver dollars, but wanted to understand a little bit more BMO's modeling and philosophy around, are we going to at some point in time codify the revenue stream within our general fund, knowing the tenuous nature of relying on grants, especially for some of our most essential direct services for youth and folks with mental health issues. And so if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure, that's a big challenge, especially with concerns. Specifically, I'm probably most focused on concerns at the state level. They are going through their own financial challenges, and what possible impacts would there be possibly passed down to us. I have a little bit more comfort with those programs that have their origins in voter-approved measures here in the city of Denver. Although I should say, they're all based on sales tax, so they're experiencing much of the same volatility as we are. When it comes to agencies that have grants in their organization, and they are getting an indication as to they might be those grants might be suspended, or they might only be temporary in nature, our budget process allows for each agency to then submit a proposal for consideration of continuing that grant application, or that grant program using city funds. So it comes out in I think two fashions. The first is trying to be opportunistic, and when there are opportunities that are supported by what we call other people's money, do we take them as an opportunity? But we also then, if those revenue streams or those grants become unstable, then we also have a process baked inside the budget process for allowed for that consideration. But you're right to think that we're kind of at a confluence here of two challenges: instability in especially those state funds, as well as a financial challenge for the city. I actually might have Stephanie Adams weigh in on this as well, because the grant program is in her shop, and how she and her team have managed through that confluence.
Hi, Councilwoman. So it is actually an annual struggle that we have, right? We think about, we actually are fortunate to be able to leverage grants across the city and do some innovative things. And quite frankly, there's some good examples of places where we did leverage grants and then actually brought that under the general fund. The GRID program is actually a great example of where that was really started by grants. And as those great dollars waned, and as those performance, we monitored that pilot, we actually began to backfill that with general fund dollars. And then sometimes it happens the other way too. There are a couple places in the city, in some of the reduction proposals, where people did have some grants that were able to alleviate some of the pressure on the general fund. Our Office of Emergency Management, for instance, because of this time, had some grants to help support a position that they were able to reduce the expenditures on the general fund side. DITO is a great example of where those dollars can sometimes wane a little bit too, or sometimes they can increase. And so it is a little bit of a case-by-case basis. You are right to think every year as we go into the budget process, we're a little concerned about how is that going to play out. The tricky thing about grants is they don't align with our budget process necessarily. That we may not find out about grants until July or October, and sort of that's the part that we have to always sort of juggle a little bit. I do, in my Budget 101, I'm going to take a minute to geek out for a second and just let all of you know that in the grants section and the special revenue section, if it's not appropriated, it mostly reflects projected expenditures within the calendar year. I'm sorry, that sounds really geeky, but sometimes you may have thought, well, hey, a grant came in for $100,000, but I'm only showing $80,000 here, and it's because we are projecting how much we're spending in that year. I'm hoping that will help answer future questions. So sorry about the deviation, but you gave me an opening.
Yeah, no. I mean, if the fiscal years do not align, you need to account for those dollars within that fiscal year. So have managed plenty of federal grants, so know that piece of it. Well, thank you. And I've got a couple follow-up questions that I'll get over to you, but want to allow time for Councilwoman Sandoval. You had some questions.
Thank you, Council President. And thank you, Brendan and Stephanie and Mayor. This is a lot of work. I know this has not been easy for us to get here today. So, Mayor, I have a question directly for you. Looking through the budget book and through the presentation, the Office of Social Equity and Innovation, it's not codified, is that correct?
No, in terms of an official, how did I try to remember how we did that? Did we just do it? Brenda, how did we do that? I can't recall.
And she's working on that right now.
Mayor, do you want me to take this?
Yeah, Sky, go ahead.
Sorry, thanks. Hi, Sky Stewart, Mayor's office. The Office of Social Equity and Innovation is codified in Executive Order, the Executive Order 146. So yes. It does live there, and the budget for it lives in Human Rights and Community Partnerships. So it's got a couple of different touch points you might be looking for.
Thank you, Sky. It's been a minute.
So thank you. So, Mayor, do you think, given the importance and how they prepared all of the agencies, I personally feel like this is a really important office to somehow codify either via ordinance or via charter. Is that something that you're looking forward to doing so that in the subsequent years following, we have this same type of data and we have the same type of lens for social equity when we're talking about gentrification and displacement and equity across all boards?
How timely your question is. I actually was in a conversation this morning about kind of my ongoing thoughts regarding not only this office, but our whole work in with regards to equity and how we, create a more permanent presence of that effort here in the city of Denver. And yeah, you might recall during the State of City address, I called racism and the social unrest really as a public health crisis. And we're going to be meeting very soon with DDPHE and other associated groups, including this office, to talk about what that means and how we translate that to action. And I see creating a more permanent presence of this office as part of that.
Thank you. So I would just, I absolutely agree with this, because last year in our presentation, the agencies asked questions, but this year with the fiscal responsibility and equity in your opening letter to us, it talks about how this office worked alongside and asked these questions. And so I just want to make sure that as we move forward into 2021, and as we're talking about our COVID response, that these questions are continuously being answered. And as great as it is to have an executive order,
I'm back, y'all. What I missed?
It may not be there. So to make sure that this is codified for
whole lot of bullshit
generations of all Denver would be awesome. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Woo.
Thank you, Councilwoman Sandoval, and for the answers. I think that's a perfect place for us to wrap up and look at that codification.
It's like they were waiting for me to come back.
One administration and really become our standard operating procedure as a city. And so want to thank everybody for joining us today. And
someone want to catch me up
tomorrow at 9:30, and we will have Dottie, our Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, joining us, and then we have the Denver Economic Development Office in the afternoon, and our Denver Department of Public Health and Environment in the afternoon as well tomorrow. And so want to encourage the public to continue to join us. And once again, thank Brendan, Stephanie, and Laura and your teams. Thank you, Mayor Hancock, for joining us, and the Office for Social Justice and Equity team as well. I would be remiss if I did not also thank our central staff office. They are the team that make sure that we all can get onto these meetings. And so want to give them a huge round of applause, because this
fuck
is the
off,
first time
Cashman. Fuck off, Clark. Fuck off, Hancock. What are you doing?
And when I was getting ready this morning, I sort of had a little anxiety attack, because I was like, oh my God, this is big. This is historic that we're doing this.
People having big anxiety attacks every day. It is big and historic, and y'all missing the moment.
Went seamless, and so want to thank everybody for their work on that, and allow you, Mayor Hancock, if you have any final words, and then we'll go ahead and adjourn.
Thank you, Madam President, and I would thank everyone for being here today, for your attention on this. Again,
all right, he's on the shit list now.
Brendan Hanlon, our Chief Financial Officer, and his team.
Bootlicking
Stephanie
butthead.
Adams and her team, the Budget Department, and the entire cabinet and agency leads for the tremendous work they did. And
we missed Taco
second the
Tuesday,
motion
didn't we?
and celebration of the social equity and justice teams for the tremendous work. I love working with them. They are a tremendous partner to someone in this office and to the
to who? To the police, not to the community, not to me.
Honest, bold, creative.
Y'all are misappropriating my husband's hard-earned money.
As we move forward, this very briefly. And by
It's
the way,
true.
let me also celebrate Sky.
If I say it, can't nobody say it to me.
The real true boss of the city, county of Denver, who tells me what to do every
No,
day.
the boss of Denver is the police, for real.
I want to just ask everyone to keep in mind and have a real appreciation for what we as a city have we went through in 2020 or are going through in 2020 and continue to be dealing with. The way this all came on us so quickly and without even a moment to breathe. I can only imagine it being similar.
Oh, did you just say you can't breathe?
Dealing with down south right now in the Gulf. Though they may have some media warnings, a little more benefit than we have. What happened with this pandemic we didn't have. And we fell deeper than the Great Depression. So this is we reacted and we survived because we all came together to survive, and you all were a part of that. But as we look forward, we don't know.
Think you did. Think you did. He just said he can't breathe, right, y'all? Oh no, you didn't.
Now and let's say July of next year, and if this season is as bad as many people forecasted, we don't have much more to go back to. We used 5% of our reserves. Another hit.
Ooh, then we might have to finally cut police, except crime will be up because poverty will too.
Part of it today about where we are, and so yes, tough decisions have to be made, but I hope we all keep that.
Yeah, the toughest decision is going to have to be for you to do your goddamn job.
Thank you, sir, and thank you to all of the thousands of city employees that every single day you get. You feed your kids, you get them set up for school, and you go and do your work. And
but he does it in private, and he doesn't show up anywhere, and he has no idea what's going on.
You are keeping those essential services out there, so thank you to all of those city employees working day in and day out as well. We appreciate that very much. And so, well, everybody enjoy your afternoons of digging down into the budget book a bit more, and we will see you back at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.
Adjourned. Adjourned. Okay. So I had a meeting and went a little long. Wasn't back quite when I wanted to be. But there you have it. Zero mention. I'm pretty sure I can sum it up. This is going to be really hard, but we're all in it together. We're doing the best we can. We're going to stay in a good financial position. Our bonds are going to stay rated right where they are. All the same talking points you heard at the RTD last night. Because I don't know if you know this, but not a single person on that RTD board has a background in finance. Like real finance. I'm sorry, private wealth manager. You're like the used car salesman of the finance world. I know this because I was shamed into not becoming one. That was the mommy track for former investor bankers. Like, you can do anything with that, MK. Gosh, you won't be able to live with yourself. So yeah, it's not real finance. FYI. And the reason that matters is because when you're talking about someone's investments, it is not the same as talking about the long-term health of a company and the balance sheets. You're thinking about a family into perpetuity. There's a finiteness to it. You're talking about taxes due today. You're not talking about the cash flows necessary to keep food in the bellies of children and lights on in a home. It is not the same view of the world whatsoever. Chris wins for dumbest statement. Oh, which one? The one that I caught at the end where he kissed like Mayor Hancock's ass? Oh, there's a lot of that? Yeah. Who all was doing it?
I mean, basically everybody except Candy.
Except Candy. What'd Candy say?
I wasn't paying that close attention, but
How did you not pay attention when Candy spoke? We talked about this.
I was so annoyed by listening to Debbie Ortega speak that I began to block the whole thing out.
Okay, that I'll accept. That I'll accept. So that's my husband, who is really good at not listening to women when he doesn't want to. That's how he survived in this marriage. Okay, I didn't say much of anything. There's probably a reason for that. She's waiting, you know. She's a smart lady. She's going to say something when she has something to say. And she was probably like just sitting there. The fact that she lived through it all is a big deal. So let me pull up my schedule over here. for all the fun stuff happening the rest of the day. Because they might think they done. We ain't done. So here are some of the other things that are happening today. So I know as I pull up this schedule, dang it. City Council calendar. Today's 17th, 16th. I don't even know. It's a day that ends in Y. They all feel the same. Committee canceled. Yep, I guess they are done until 9:30 tomorrow morning. I misread that. Okay, that's my bad. Well, there are other things going on today, and I'll be streaming most of them. This afternoon, I have to go do the mom thing, and I do have a day job that I'm going to have to do a little work for. Got an exciting interview about body image representation and the fitness industry that I'll be doing with Linda Ashline, Lindley Ashline, who has one of the largest online stock photos of non-white people doing very normal things. That'll be for an interview for the Running Life podcast. Then I'll be sitting down with some numbers to make sure that I'm ready for the town hall at 6 p.m. that Candy Sedabaka will be hosting with Brother Jeff to discuss all this stuff. I will be streaming that, and I'll probably be participating as well. Finally, if you, like me, are an abolitionist and you understand how the need to defund impacts everything in the chain of systemic racism, then you will want to be there when I stream from another computer, because there's going to be a lot going on tonight. I'm basically going to be recording this for me so that I can watch it later because it's happening at the same time. Ruth Wilson Gilmore is going to be speaking in New York City, and it's going to be live streamed. I've got tickets, and I know that the tickets were kind of hard to get. So since they're live streaming it too, I'm like, well, we might as well share it with all the people who care about abolition, but were not aware of this event. So there are 3 people in that abolitionist world. When they speak, I drop everything. You already know Elizabeth Epps. The second is Mariam Kaba, Mariamekaba, but her Twitter account is closed. Yes. Oh, okay. The DSA is here to pick up the chairs for that I accidentally forgot to give them last night for jail support. And so, yeah. And the third, so
are you expecting somebody else to do that, or are you going to do that?
I'll go down. I'm just wrapping up, and then I'll go down. No, I'm not expecting anybody else to do it. So I'm needed. Yes, when she needs to speak, she will. So the 3 people, the 3 abolitionists, when they speak, I listen because they don't speak in public very frequently. Elizabeth Epps, Mariam Kaba, and Ruth Wilson Gilmore. All 3 ladies are fantastic. Ruth Wilson Gilmore will be speaking tonight, and I'll be live streaming that as well, concurrent at 6 p.m. to the town hall, but we're going to be doing both. Either way, stay here, stay mad. There might be something else that I decide to stream later, but that is my day to day. Otherwise, I'll be back recapping later tonight and giving you, I'm going to try to sit down if I have time and make out a guide to the things to look for in tomorrow's budget meetings that you might not have picked up on today, and why those things matter and should matter to you. Final note, the reason I care about this, if you know anyone who's ever been to business school, most people hate accounting. They think it's boring. They think it's rote. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So I'm teaching you guys how to engage with this material the same way that I was taught. The guy that taught me worked for the SEC, and he had just been fired from his job for this company that he'd been warning about called Enron, saying like they're hiding things, and that got him that got in the wrong person's hands, and this guy got fired. So he walked in on the first day of this job he did not want to have, slamming financials down on the table. Everybody's hiding money from their spouse, from the IRS, or from the government itself, from their shareholders. Let's see who's hiding what today. And that was how I learned to read financial statements. If everyone learned to read financial statements the way I did, like Dora the Explorer, not even Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego style, with a whole lot of anger, you'd love accounting too. So I love having these conversations. I love looking for what people don't want you to see. And I love looking at the man behind the mirror. So we will get back to doing that a little bit later. Hang tight, share this with your friends, fight the power, But if we're going to fight, we got to know what we're fighting and what we want to get at the end of the day.